republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Kat, is there anyone here for a public forum? There's not? Okay. All right. Well, then let's move into the consent agenda.
Move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
I abstain.
And the abstention. All right. Thank you. Study items. The Sun Inn Realty Development is our first order of business this evening. So, welcome.
Thanks, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
Yeah, I wasn't
Well,
sure where
come on up and
last time we presented the board, it wasn't as official.
we weren't videotaping at
Got
the
it.
time. Yes.
Yeah. That's all right.
We are now
Everybody is
recording.
nowadays.
Yeah, that's all right. So I'm GT Kozad with Kozad Commercial Real Estate. This is Rick Kalous. He's a Sun Inn family member. Kozad's been a real estate partner of Sun Inn since the late 80s. Just a quick background, Sun Inn owns the manufacturing facility at Hanley, Manchester. They own the Sun Inn Business Park. They own the property across Manchester from the Sun Inn Products Company plant, where like Post Holdings just moved into and Caleres just moved into. And then they also own part of the development where Maserati and Porsche and the apartments are. Tonight we're talking about that development. Sun Inn has one big lot left. They have 6.6 acres left. And we have been studying the lots, that lot, and we're thinking about doing a second phase of the apartments on half of that 6.6 acres, so approximately 3.2 acres. And also part of that background, we have a redevelopment agreement with the city of Maplewood, and we have incentives attached with that redevelopment agreement. Right now, in that whole redevelopment area, we have tax abatement and we have a SID overlay. The tax abatement gives us 10 years at 100% abatement and 5 years at 50% abatement. Part of that redevelopment agreement is we have a cap in our total redevelopment across the entire 20 plus acres of $12 million. We've studied doing the second phase, and as part of that, we're going to hand out a couple handouts. Our Sun Inn's attorneys have asked that we hand these out and then recollect them because we have not made these public yet. We have not approached the city council officially yet. The goal tonight is to get your feedback and to get your support, hopefully, so that we can ultimately present it to the city council with your support. So Rick's going to hand out some documentation, and I'm going to go through a couple of the pieces of paperwork. So we're going to go through the smaller pages first instead of the long page, but you can pass that. You can. So I'll wait until everyone has it, actually. So, and I'm not going to go into a ton of detail. I'm going to try to go over the highlights. But the smaller packet that you're getting, the first page is the financials on Sun Inn Station Phase 1. So it's the financials on the apartments that are up right now. And the numbers that Clifton Larson Allen, which is the accounting firm that Sun Inn used, the numbers that they used are part of a HUD audit. So this is a HUD financed apartment complex. So it has to be audited so that we can present the financials each year to the government. So they use the HUD financials, and we're showing our internal rate of return on the project based upon the revenue and the expenses and the projected revenue going forward. So I showed the internal rate of return with abatement, which we have right now, and then what it would be if we didn't have abatement. So with abatement, you can see the internal rate of return is approximately 6.29%. If we didn't have that abatement that we have in place, we'd be at 0.58%. So back when we presented and we got the school board support and we got city council approval several years ago, we had to give what's called a but-for analysis, meaning but for tax abatement, we wouldn't be able to build the buildings and get a return on the property.
With a reasonable risk.
Yeah, with a reasonable risk. So in looking at a phase 2, I've got the next page is phase 2's projected financials, and I'm going to also go ahead and you can flip through the design, which is all the pages behind it. We are proposing, or we're hoping to propose, a new 121 unit complex, very similar to the first phase, but instead of 3 wings, it's 2 wings. It's still 4 stories. It's going to have all separate amenities, pool, workout. We're planning a mini dog park. So it's very similar. It's going to have a large courtyard if we did it. The difference is the first phase had about 66% were 1 bedroom and 33% were 2 bedrooms. This particular phase would have 82% 1 bedroom / studios and only 18% 2 bedrooms. The studios and 1 bedrooms rented a lot faster, and the 2 bedrooms took a little bit more time, and so that's the plan for phase 2.
Still 3 there if everybody want to move in.
Yeah, phase 1 is 96% leased right now, so it has been staying rented. So you're able to see if anyone's been in phase 1, there's a lot of similarities, and the only difference I'd say is we're doing a little bit different amenities, and then we'd have to have a 1-level parking deck. So there will be some covered parking that would be on the Metrolink side of this phase 2. So going back to that second piece of financials, we're showing projected financials with abatement again and without abatement to show the school board and likely the city council that with abatement it's a 7-ish% return. Without abatement, we projected around a 2.19% internal rate of return. So does anyone, I guess, have any questions about those first, I guess, any of that, phase 1 or phase 2 or what we're thinking?
So the financial instrument on the abatement doesn't really change with the second phase, right? As it still fits within that, was it a 523 or whatever the tax abatement was?
353. So
353.
So you're correct. So that's where this last larger spreadsheet comes in.
Yep.
So the tax abatement that we have in place is for the entire
acreage.
development,
Okay.
and there's a $12 million cap.
Got it.
So what I tried to do on this larger spreadsheet is say, okay, and you can see in 2018, our tax abatement started. It started for phase 1, it started for Porsche, and it started for the Maserati dealership.
Okay.
And those are actual tax amounts because it was assessed, fully assessed, and it got the abatement, and so it went through. So those are actual numbers. And then I projected numbers going forward, and I projected increases at 1.5% per year that we'd get reassessed, so we'd have a raise in taxes at some point, starting in 2021, and they go up from there. So you'll see that I have tax abatement going 100% for 10 years for those 3, and then it cuts in half. It goes to 50% of the taxes for 5 years, and then it goes to 0.
Right.
Okay.
So it's like a 15-year kind of.
15 years,
term,
exactly.
Right.
And then on phase 2, what I just showed as a potential build, I estimated that the taxes would start at $225,000 in 2021, and that's based upon it being a slightly smaller complex because first phase was 174 units, this is 121 units, and I projected the same thing: 10 years at 100%, 5 years at 50. And then if anyone has driven by out there, you know there's a vacant lot in between Porsche and Maserati that's right up on Hanley Road. The city of Maplewood's requiring them. Porsche owned that. Porsche bought that. They have tax abatement as part of that project because it's in the redevelopment area. City of Maplewood has required them to have a building up on that lot within 3 years. We've heard it's another. The owner of Porsche it's called Indigo Group, and they own like every high-end. They own Ferrari and McLaren. We've heard that they're going to put some high-end thing. I don't know what it is, but they have to have a building up within 3 years per their deal with Maplewood. And then what I did is on phase 3 land, because if you remember, we have another 3.5 acres left. I projected doing basically another phase 2. I projected, okay, let's hope that we can have another apartment complex, but maybe we wouldn't get it done until 2023. So then when you see at the bottom, when you total, we have a running total of our abatement. Our abatement, because of the $12 million cap that we have in the redevelopment agreement, it will run out just after 2028. So basically what that means is everything, if we don't get extended abatement, then everything's going to, all of our incentives would end at that point. So what we like to request, or what we're trying to request, is to not change anything with phase 1, not change anything with Porsche, not change anything with Maserati, keep the same 10 years at 100%, 5 years at 50, but we would like to ask the city of Maplewood to get rid of the cap and say every piece of the development, so phase 2 and phase 3, if we do it, gets 10 years at 100% and 5 years at 50. We want them to have the same benefit as the phase 1 of the apartments, is what we would like to ask them. So from the school district standpoint, I tried to look at it from your all standpoint and say, okay, why does this help me? Why is this good for me? What questions would I have? And our position is that the more that we build, the more development that we build, that at some point there's going to be much higher taxes. And you all, at least from my analysis on the county website, I think you guys get 60.7% of real estate taxes. I think that's what's passed through to the school district. So in essence, the bigger the pot, the more money you'll get at some point. So what I tried to do down at the bottom is say, okay, if phase 2 and phase 3 are developed, and we get the 15 years, we get 10 years at 100% and 5 years at 50%, then those are your running annual totals of how much money would go from the development to the school district in taxes. And if we don't do phase 2 and phase 3, say Porsche needs more parking, which they do, and we just lease it as a parking lot. We just asphalt it and lease it as a parking lot. So we don't do phase 2 and phase 3, then we show the taxes staying at current, which I should have said this at the beginning. Taxes we're not paying zero taxes. We're paying the taxes as they were in place prior to when we tore down the home. So if there was, for example, I think on the phase 1 apartments, I don't have that number exactly in front of me. I think the taxes for all those houses just in that 4.5 acre area were around $35,000. We still pay those taxes right now, no matter what. There's what's called a pilot payment. So the abated amount is anything that was developed over and above that pilot payment amount. So then at the end, I tried to do an aggregate total of if we did phase 2 and phase 3 versus if we didn't, what increase in amount of money you'd have through 2038 at $1.45 million. And then I just added another 10 years because you could see the difference in the last year of 2038 is $865,000 in taxes versus $538,000 taxes per year. That's an annual number. So we estimated that the school district would get approximately $4.7 million in the 2048 time frame if everything was developed. Any questions about the analysis, I guess?
Hi, I have a question.
Sure.
Can you tell us when, I guess you initially entered into the redevelopment agreement with the city of Maplewood?
I think it was in 2015 or 16, isn't it?
5 years ago?
Yeah, 15 or 16.
I have to look it up.
So when we entered into that redevelopment agreement with the city of Maplewood, I should say this too, we weren't exactly sure how everything was going to go with the development. I mean, way back when, 10 years ago, we thought it was going to be crazy office development, and we have presented to BJC, which we lost to the Cortex, so we have presented different things to different potential groups. But when we had that cap put in place as part of that redevelopment agreement, we thought the cap was going to be good enough to get us the 10 years and the 5 years. And once we built a $30 million apartment complex and the county assessed it at what they did, our taxes are a little higher than projected, and we assume it's going to be the same if we did the same thing for phase 2 and phase 3, is we're just hitting our cap way faster than we projected. And therefore, if we don't get the abatement and we try to do phase 2 and phase 3, I think phase 2 would have abatement for 8-ish years and phase 3 maybe for 5 or 6 years.
And I think you made a statement about like the possibility to extend a tax abatement. Would you be asking for that possibly?
No. So as part of our ask is that we would do nothing other than the 10 years at 100%, 5 years at 50 for each project. So phase 1, when it hits that 15-year mark, it's done. So, and that's already in the redevelopment agreement that's max. Even though per law you can ask for 25, we're asking for 10 years and 5 years.
Here we go.
We're just basically asking for the cap to be eliminated so that each particular project gets that same 10-year, 5-year benefit.
I'm assuming demographics of the phase one are younger.
It's definitely
single,
it's a younger single
okay.
crowd.
The other concern we had was sort of from population growth, and we're kind of bursting at the seams and
Yeah.
being able to understand what that could do to
Yeah.
you know.
The impact on
I
the
think
impact
it's,
of enrollment.
I think the average age is like 26, 27.
Yeah,
I mean, really, the only issue that we've had at that complex is the pool gets too busy on the weekends. I mean, it's like a fun place to go, but yeah.
So you've got a 96% occupancy rate right now, which is stellar.
Took a lot of work to get there, by the way.
Sure.
Yeah.
Are you concerned at all about diluting your occupancy rate with 2 more phases?
So no, I think I studied the apartment multifamily industry in general a lot across the nation, and I can't compare us to San Diego or, I can't compare us to East and West Coast. But if you look at just demographics and population, and even when you see the amount of supply that you're like, oh my God, there's this going up in U City and this going up here, and even if you look at the supply that's going up, I think we're underserved by thousands of units compared to our demographics. And I also think that if you think about the housing supply, anywhere mid-county, you can't find any land to build any buildings, any big neighborhoods anywhere. There's just not, you know what I mean? To build any good housing development, you're having to go way out from mid-county. So I think there's going to be a long demand for multifamily.
So just so I understand, should you wind up, unfortunately, in a situation where you have a lot of vacant units, what kind of, or are there any tax advantages or write-offs that you can make at that point?
So the reason, I'm going to answer it a little bit different way. The reason why Sunnen wants to do multifamily is because they have a lot of office, a lot of industrial, a lot of manufacturing, and they were trying to diversify. And multifamily, at least in our opinion, if you start having a little bit of issues with vacancy, you just lower the rates a little bit. And so usually, historically, if you look across the market, if you lower the rates, you're gonna get people in there, and you're gonna have, your numbers aren't gonna be as good, but I think we still feel like we have a good coverage with regards to our risk.
So you think you have room, you have flexibility to keep your occupancy up by adjusting rates?
Correct.
Yes.
From a pricing perspective, yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
We look at that very carefully, because it's risk analysis.
I'm sure.
So, do you have another question? No. Okay, this is my last question. We have had town halls lately, and we have community members telling us that they're concerned about like the lack of diversity in our housing. And so I understand that, you're approaching us and seeking support, but I guess, what do we say to those community members that are like, we need housing that's more than 1 bedroom, that's more than a studio, and this is an opportunity to have it, but that's not what is happening with this site.
Mm-hmm. I think the best answer is we still do have we have 2 bedrooms available on phase 1. We're still trying to do a percentage of 2 bedrooms, and they are large. Our 1 bedrooms are pretty large and they're efficient. So we're trying to do our best to meet the demand in the area, and I think it seems like there's still availability, but there's no intention on our part to do more 2 bedrooms or even anything bigger than 2 bedrooms.
We've
right
always
now.
had 2 bedrooms available thus
Yeah,
far.
yeah. There's always 2 bedrooms
And
available right
the
now.
point is not to have a whole bunch, because then it really destroys your financial model, and to your point, you've got to rent them out to cover your mortgage.
What is the rate for the 2-bedroom unit?
So there's in phase 1, there's 14 different styles of apartments. So there's a broad range between the units. I mean, I think we're as low as $800 for some of the lower, like the studios, and I think we're as high as almost 2,000 for some of the biggest 2 bedrooms that are like on the corner top floor. I say there are a lot of 2 bedrooms in maybe the 1,400 range, 1,500
There's
range.
a lot of amenities that come with that too, by the way. Not just the pool area.
Right, dog washing station. We have a lot of stuff in there.
Washers and dryers are all there
Yeah.
and all that kind of stuff, so.
Do most of your residents, I guess, what I'm trying to see is, are there more professional people who work within a certain radius of your units? I don't know if you have any information.
So I do have the demographics. I didn't bring it. The management company that handles it, they have a full demographic of where the people came from, and then sometimes the people have to enter where they work. So we have some of that information that we could probably get you. But yeah, most of them seem to work in the general vicinity. I know that some of them have used MetroLink and have gone to local hospitals, work at some of the local hospitals. But yeah, for the most part, they work around the area.
So I was just curious if they were residents who were maybe relocated here.
There's a lot of that as well.
Yeah, there has been that too. Mhm.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Appreciate you guys coming here. If anything changes, substantially, we appreciate kind of that heads
Just
up.
keeping you guys
So
informed.
appreciate the way that you
Sounds
guys-
good. Thank you very much.
JT, when are you going before the Maplewood Conference?
So we wanted to see if there was feedback from you all first before we went. Our hope would be that we could even go as soon as next month. We still have, if we move forward with this, we'd still have several months of finishing, because we haven't pulled the trigger on a lot of the expensive items, but CDs, and then actually getting approvals, and the construction process. Last time we did this, we started building in November, which was not fun building through the beginning of the winter. Our goal would be to build sometime around June, start in June, because it's about a 12-month build process. So we'd be able to get a bunch of it under roof. But we'd have to go through, as you know, we'd have to go through a couple city council meetings if we were able to get a redevelopment agreement amended, and we have to go through design review board because they have not seen any of the designs or anything.
So that would give us time to marinate on this a little bit, and if we have questions, who should we direct those
You can reach out to
directly?
me. I probably can disseminate the questions better to anyone else. I'll leave my card with everyone.
Great, thank you.
All right.
Should I collect
I
those?
apologize, I wrote on.
Oh, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Oh. All right, Mr. Flores, you're up next.
I think there's enough.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate your question. Thank you. We answered most of them.
Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our summer school proposal.
Alrighty, well, good evening, everybody. My name is Josh Flores. I'm the assistant principal at the middle school. First, I want to say thank you so much for the opportunity to, one, serve as a leader at the middle school here as assistant principal, and two, to be the director of summer school programming. I'm excited to share with you what we have to offer this summer. And so the purpose tonight is to talk a little bit about some of the planning priorities that we had of what went into building this summer school program, taking a look at what we would like to offer our students and kind of a projected student breakdown, and then also lastly look at the budget that we have generated and created also for budget approval purposes there. So some of the planning priorities that we had was first and foremost the continuity of MRH staff. One of the things that we have here are incredible and awesome teachers, and we want those teachers interacting with our students as often as possible. And summer school provides a great 3-week window for our teachers to continue to gain a relationship, gain a rapport with those students, and to not only prevent summer learning loss, but also to improve academic gains. And so one thing that we really focus on is trying to have as many of our MRH teachers with this process for that 3-week period. Secondly, we would like to provide a high-quality, data-driven and research-based summer school curriculum and summer school program. I'm really excited that we're going to use the same program that we started with 2 years ago that the district purchased. We've seen some really excellent results, not only in keeping students engaged, but also improving literacy scores as well as math scores in a really, really short time frame over the summer. Lastly, we'd also like to increase student attendance, both with the enrichment components and with that 3-week period that we consider the more traditional summer school. Some areas that we've looked at this year is the dates. We've provided a 1-week buffer, so we would start June 8th, and then we'd also like to end June 26th, which would keep us in the month of June and away from the 4th of July week. We'd also love to provide a variety of enrichment experiences for our students and for our families to keep them not only engaged with the school, but also engaged in the community, going to places like the zoo, have a Rubik's Cube brain gym, things that we'll get into later on with what we'd like to offer our students. And lastly, we'd like to be fiscally responsible. One thing that we've done this year is broken down, instead of it just being one giant lump sum of being summer school remediation portion and the enrichment portion, we've separated out into 2 separate phases to help better understand the finances that go into our summer program. So without further ado, our remediation component is kind of what you consider the more traditional facet of summer school. So what we do for the remediation piece is students are invited based off of their academic progress and academic performance. And so each level has different criteria, the ECC, the elementary school, the middle school, and the high school, but each one is tracking how our students are doing and inviting them to participate in summer school based off of some of their academic gains and some of their academic needs that we see there. Because this is a component of the services that we offer during the regular school year, there is no fee attached to the summer school portion of this remediation piece. We focus on having a small class size with a maximum of about 15 students. That way teachers are able to better work with their small groups, provide greater one-on-one instruction, just really be able to reach and connect with those students on a better level than having larger class sizes. The high school operates a little bit differently. It operates on a credit recovery model where students have the opportunity to earn back half of a credit. And so we can look at the next slide, which kind of breaks that down a little bit more. The middle school, the ECC, and the elementary school will operate on the same schedule, which will be 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, also a 5-hour day for students being at school from 7:30 to 12:30. And so what we look at during that time period is having 2.5 hours for math instruction and 2.5 hours for literacy instruction. The classes are going to be organized based off of student need. So some of the classes will be based off of students kind of staying with their current grade level, but then other classes might be combined with based on academic performance and the academic needs and the level that that student is at moving forward. We're projecting about 120 to 150 students. Again, this is based off of invitations, and so families have the option to opt in. And so it's a little bit difficult to project the exact number that we're going to have, but fairly consistent over the last couple of years with 120 to 150. The middle school, again, operates on that same 5-day schedule, 5 hours. One thing that we're really excited to offer this year is a pre-algebra course for our exiting 8th grade students. One of the classes that students kind of traditionally struggle with at the high school level is Algebra 1. It's the first serious math course that students are being faced with at the high school level, and so we'd like to provide them with the opportunity to get kind of some solid footing going into high school mathematics. Again, at the high school, it's a credit-bearing class. They operate on a different schedule. It's 4.5 hours a day. They would arrive at about 8 a.m. and then end at 12:40. We'd like to offer a core class in every core subject that students can have the opportunity for credit recovery, but they could also elect to sign up for a personal finance or a PE class in order to kind of gain credit before the school year starts. So those are the 2 options there at the high school. And so looking at the finances, what we did in putting together the projected budget was looked at the last 3 years of data, the actual cost that we had. And so because the traditional summer school functions as a component of DESI, there is a state revenue that can be generated from that and is associated with that. It isn't kind of like a lump sum situation. It is distributed throughout the course of the year based off of average daily attendance, and so that's why our attendance numbers at summer school are really important. The projected state revenue for this year would be $25,000. The largest component that would be the biggest cost for us would be providing salaries and benefits. You'll see it's a little bit larger this year, but that is because we'd like to offer that pre-algebra course for our exiting 8th grade students, which would be pretty awesome if we could do that. Purchase services at $1,000. The supplies, we will not have to purchase curriculum again, which is a wonderful cost-saving measure there. And so the total expenses comes to about $48,500, and so the net cost when you subtract the state revenue, is $23,500 to operate the traditional side of summer school. Now, that's only one half of our summer school, but we're also super excited about the enrichment piece, which we'll talk about next. So the enrichment component of summer school is kind of more the extracurricular side. What we like to have here is it open to the entire community, where families can select and choose from a wide menu of options that they would like their students to attend. This year, we're going to continue with the model of last year, where we're going to provide AM sessions and PM sessions, which in order to not only provide more classes for our students, but also for the students that are in the traditional summer school that ends at 12:30, they have the opportunity to sign up for an extracurricular component after that time is over. The enrichment piece really offers learning in non-traditional settings. We're getting students out in the community, we're keeping students engaged, we're keeping them active, and not only building academic skills, but also some of those soft skills like communication, collaboration, creativity, really focusing on other areas that might not be able to be focused on during the whole school year. Now, because this is not connected with DESE, in order to operate the enrichment side, we do charge a fee. The fee is based on a varied pay structure based off of the student's free and reduced lunch status. So the families that pay full lunch would pay 100% of the fee, reduced lunch 75% of the fee, and free lunch would be 50% of the fee. And so for a clear picture of what the fee looks like, we can go on to the next slide. And so the fees get a little bit complicated because we are offering two separate time periods, two separate time frames. The morning session is about 2 hours longer, and so there's a higher fee associated with that time period. You can see that the fees there are $75 per week, and the programs that are there, that depending on what course the student signs up for, it could be a 1 week 5-day course, it could be a 2 week 10-day course, or it could be a 3 week 15-day course. And so depending, again, on what students select, it changes how much the fees are associated with that. What we like to do in each of our classes is offer at least 15 to 30 students enrolled. That way it covers some of the costs of operating that. For courses that'll have less than 15 students, we might not be able to offer that just based off of the way the rest of the budget breaks down, but that hasn't been too much of an issue in the past. The middle school, we also provide a 3-week field study that lasts June 8th through 26th. There's a higher fee associated with that just because there are travel expenses and there's a larger supply demand there that results in a larger fee. Some of the potential offerings that we have. So the way that this process works is we send out information to teachers about when summer school will last, what dates we're going to be offering summer school, and we give teachers the opportunity to create and design courses. So here are some of the courses that teachers are excited to offer to potentially provide for our families. You see everything from yoga to focusing on sports, to fun with junk, to poetry camp, to really just getting students thinking and being active over that summer time period. And so the enrichment piece is here because we are charging a fee. There is a revenue side that we could generate, about $25,000 we're projecting there. Again, the largest cost is going to be with our salaries and benefits. Again, the more courses that we are offering, the larger the salaries and benefits is going to be, but the more things that we can offer our students, the better it will be ultimately in the end. Purchase services, about $1,000. The supply costs here are larger, once again, because teachers are creating and designing their own courses. Each teacher has submitted what they think it will cost to provide students with supplies, things like writing journals or things like museum passes, those types of things. I've added all those up and it comes to about $3,000 for a total cost of $39,000 with the net cost of $14,000 to the district. So do you guys have any questions? Yes, sir.
Are we being conservative with those revenue projections?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then connected to that, I feel like even though the enrichment classes, I appreciate our varied pay scale
Mhm.
for the abilities of our community members to be able to afford it, but even those paying 100%, I feel like those rates are
Yes.
more than reasonable. So I'll be the chorus that sort of looks at that every year and says we may consider bumping those up just
Okay.
a little bit. But
Sure.
I mean, it sounds like the 25,000 is maybe a pretty low estimate.
It
I mean,
is.
the
So
demand seems to always be there for these.
with
type of
what went into that projection of 25,000 is last year was the first year that we offered those two separate systems of the AM and the PM sessions, and so we really saw an increase in the number of courses that were offered.
Yeah.
Right now, unfortunately, we don't have the same number of courses being offered based off of teacher interest right now, and so we're looking at not operating as many opportunities as we had last year. So I'm still trying to
Yeah.
rally the troops, so to speak, and increase the number of offerings that we have. And so that's also why that's a little bit lower, just because we don't have as many
And that's fair, and I
sessions.
appreciate, that's the right way to go about approaching it. I would say if there's a way to continue to get feedback
Sure.
from our parents on the fees and, you know,
Mhm.
what do they feel about them? Are they reasonable? Are they appropriate? Nobody's gonna voluntarily say, pay, you know, I'd like to pay more, but
Of
at the
course.
same time, I think they would probably agree that given other camps and other summer offerings, these are a bargain.
So Francis, I would agree with that, but I would add this too because of the time constraints. Because my kids are no longer in that program, but we just come out of that. You've got a lot of your families who don't meet the burden of not making, you know, of making the right income, but they're still struggling, especially in this day and age and in this area. And so I do want to be careful of that because we may be pricing them out of that opportunity, especially when we've got taxes, et cetera, going up in this wonderful district. So just to keep that in mind too, because I think our prices are more than reasonable, but they're also having to add childcare still, because their kids are out
I
at
think
12:40.
it would be incumbent on us to also look at the variable pay rates and not just use free and reduced lunch, but maybe, you know, a sliding scale of some sort.
I like that idea too.
Give some
Yeah.
help there, but.
We will certainly take that, and think about how we might look at that moving forward. One thing I did want to point out though, is we always bring you our projections, which are always somewhere near
Yeah.
36,000. When we come back in the fall, over the last 3 to 4 years, our actual costs have been anywhere from 14 to 16. So we almost always beat our projections, but we have to kind of come to you with what we
Yep.
think is worst case scenario.
And the state revenues on the summer school piece of that, is that, those fluctuate based off of?
So you get, Chris, help me here, you get a multiplier, if kids attended the
Time.
regular school year,
Uh-huh.
then you get a multiplier of their attendance that extends into the summer.
Okay.
So the more kids that come that were with us through the
Right.
regular school year, so we actually probably are getting more than the 25,000,
Yeah.
but if we just peel off the summer school portion of that,
Yeah.
that's the number we're putting in front of you. But
Okay.
actually, their ADA for the entire year goes up the more
Yep.
days that they're with us.
Okay.
For purposes of payments, the school year begins at the start of the summer session, not the end of the fall session.
Okay.
It's hard to,
School finance,
Yeah,
always clear as mud.
it's hard to give you a clear guesstimate, but that's what's happening.
Okay.
It will increase their overall attendance, which will carry with us for the remainder of the school year. So we
Yeah.
actually think we get a bump above that, but
Yeah.
that's the amount that
We can count on for now.
yes.
Right.
Nearly impossible to extricate.
Understood.
For the, not the enhancement piece,
Mhm.
the other piece, yeah, how many kids get invited and how many show up on average?
Sure. So that again is depending. So last year, we actually, the reason that the summer school numbers were lower on that side is because we invited less students, which means that our students were performing better throughout the school year, which is a good thing. And so it just kind of varies and depends per year. But I can speak a little bit more about what we're doing at the middle school. So at the middle school, it's based off of the MAP scores and the STAR 360 data. And so what we've looked at is looking at projections and percentiles of how our students are performing. And so that 0 to 10 percentile that we're going to invite the students are considered like urgent intervention is needed. And so those are our first to really send the letters home to invite them to summer school. Then it goes to the next level, which is still intervention. It's like 11% to 25 percentile of the scores. And so there's kind of a sliding scale at each of the schools where we go through the lists and try to get to those numbers of where we're at least 50 or maximum of 15 students per class. So does that help kind of clarify that a little bit?
Yeah, I
Okay.
understand all that.
I'm talking to Jason back here, we're guesstimating that we have about 80% that actually will come from
Okay.
those that we invite, 80 to 85.
80, not 8.0.
80%.
80%, okay. That's what I thought you said.
Yeah.
My ears aren't so good, so. All right, great, thanks.
That's good. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Gleason, you're up. SSD program evaluation and course change. Double duty. Hi there.
Good evening.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm Ben Gleason, Special Education Coordinator for the district, and I'm going to share some background information about special education with you all this evening, some demographic data, a little snapshot of what students may experience who receive special ed services, and then in the second half of my presentation, I'm going to speak specifically about some secondary curriculum proposals that we've prepared for you. Obviously, you know the MRH mission statement, but I did want to just highlight the SSD mission statement since we are working together here. And you can see in the SSD mission statement, it starts with collaboration. And that's really what we are about here in MRH, is working together to support all of our students. For the ultimate purpose of helping students become successful contributing members of our communities. And here in MRH, of course, through becoming leaders, scholars, stewards, and citizens. So in terms of special ed, we start with some beliefs. Those beliefs being that all students are capable of learning, all students are presumed to be competent, and all students deserve to be treated with dignity. You may think that should be all kids, and it should be, but historically in our country that's not always been the case for students with disabilities. So we want to make sure that we have those beliefs in the front of our minds. We also believe that all students deserve access to the MRH curriculum as well as the Missouri State Learning Standards. And we want our students to have opportunities to develop self-determination skills and autonomy. Again, autonomy, self-determination, those are things that people with disabilities over the years have not had the chance to experience. So we want our kids to develop those kinds of skills as well. So the purpose of special education really is to provide specially designed instruction. And that means adapting content, adapting methods, so that we are providing instruction that meets the unique needs of each of our learners. Some of the instructional practices that we employ, direct and explicit instruction, modeling, guided practice, multi-sensory strategies to engage different aspects of the child's brain, scaffolding instruction, providing different cues, prompts, supports. We also, for many students, provide accommodations in terms of the environment in which they learn. The timing. Many students need additional time, different pacing of learning, and we may provide additional reinforcement and encouragement for students who have experienced some struggles in their learning. We also may modify material. And modification in the special ed world actually refers to changing what they are learning in order to meet them where they are. We also provide various assistive technologies, things like FM systems for students who may need support with hearing, additional computer programs, those kinds of things. And then for some students, augmentative communication tools, that being for students who have difficulty speaking. This is clearly too small for you to read from where you are, but if you can follow along. I wanted to share just a little bit of information about the special ed process and how students become eligible for special ed services. I should preface it by saying we are adhering to the criteria outlaid by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. So at any point in the year, school staff or families can request an evaluation to consider special ed services. Then we gather data and we consider whether an assessment is warranted based on whether we suspect a child may have a disability. If we do suspect and the parent then grants consent to assess, we assess the child, hold a meeting to determine if that child is eligible based on state criteria? If they are, then an individualized education program meeting would be scheduled and held. And at that meeting, we're talking about what kinds of goals we will work on with the child, what kinds of services will be provided, what kinds of accommodations and modifications they may need in order to level the playing field for that particular child. And then that IEP document is reviewed and revised on at least an annual basis. I referred to state criteria. The state criteria are relevant to 16 different eligibility categories. And being small as we are here in MRH, we don't actually have students who are in all of these categories, but we do have a number of categories that are a little bit more prevalent. Wanted to share a little bit about our enrollment. And our enrollment has essentially mirrored the enrollment increases in MRH as a whole. You can see in 16-17 school year, we had 164 students with IEPs, and that represented 12.8% of our student population here in MRH. Jump ahead to this year, 19-20, we're up over 40 students, and we are serving 14.4% of our MRH population. To give you a little bit of context, the most recent data from DESE is that statewide, about 13.6% of students have IEPs. In St. Louis County, it's a little bit higher, more like 16%. So we're right in between the state average and the county average. Here is a slide that shows you a little bit about the disability trends. You can see our largest area of disability is one called other health impairment. And that's a disability that requires some sort of medical diagnosis and then also an educational need. For most students, that medical diagnosis is ADHD. That's the most recent or most common reason why a student might be determined eligible as a student with an other health impairment. You can also see autism is one of our more prevalent disability areas, speech impairment, and then specific learning disability.
Does dyslexia fall into the other health impairments space?
No, generally, if a child has a medical or a private diagnosis of dyslexia, then we're generally looking at a specific learning disability,
Okay.
Specifically in reading.
I was wondering with the changes in the law and screening around
Right.
that.
Yeah, and that's a good example of there are medical or clinical diagnoses, and then there are educational disabilities, and the criteria are not exactly the same. In terms of the gender of the students we serve, as of this year, we're serving about 70% of our students with IEPs are male, 30% female. Obviously, that's not consistent with the gender makeup of MRH. This is a common trend across the county. In terms of race, you can see here the dark blue is African American, the darker green is multiracial, and then the light green is white. And this breakdown does mirror the demographics in MRH as a whole a little bit closer than the gender. And then finally, the free and reduced lunch status versus full pay status. You can see in the light blue is our free and reduced numbers. And so you can see students with IEPs are trending in the same direction as our overall free and reduced percentages here in MRH. These next couple slides refer to least restrictive environment. And least restrictive environment is a mandate whereby we attempt to serve students as close to and as much as possible in the regular education environment. what you see in this slide is on the far left where it says inside greater than 80%, greater than or equal to 80%, that means students being served in the regular classroom 80% or more of their day. Okay. And so if you're looking at the columns on the far left and then the third column, you can see the MRH on the far left. A high percentage of our students, 75 to 76%, spend the majority of their day in a regular MRH classroom, as compared to the state average is under 60%. So the takeaway here is that we are doing a nice job including kids in the regular classroom, exposing them to the MRH curriculum at a rate greater than districts across the state are doing. You can also see on this slide where it talks about inside less than 40%. So that being students who are in the regular ed setting less than 40% of the time. You can see our percentage is quite low, around the 4% range, whereas the state is more than double that at 8%. So we're not separating kids as much as other districts are in the state. So the next few slides are designed to give you a little idea of what a student with an IEP experiences on a day-to-day basis in terms of what their schedule might be like. So this example is a student who falls in the category of greater than 80%. And what I've done to the right of each section of the day is I've indicated an R for the regular ed setting or an S for the special ed setting. So this sample student arrives at school, eats breakfast, goes to math, all in their regular classroom. Then they're participating in science in their regular classroom, but they may get pulled out to the special ed setting for speech therapy a couple times a week, 30 minutes. And then you can see the rest of their day is in the regular ed classroom. In the middle placement category of 40 to 79%, you can see this sample student arrives and eats breakfast with their peers in their regular classroom. Then they go to a special ed setting for their math services. They rejoin their peers in science, but then experience speech therapy in a special ed setting. They go to social studies with their peers in the classroom, go to writing, but then they may be pulled out for a little social skills support.
One of the quick question.
Yeah.
On the social ed setting piece, that's just more of a designation of sort of how the student's learning, not necessarily any kind of qualitative separate space. You know, we talk about space issues right now with we have Prop E, and one of the challenges I think is finding enough, you know,
yes,
space for the learning that needs to go on individually with individual kids. So
right.
when you mention that could be taking place within a classroom or in a subdivided area, not necessarily a separate space, or is that a separate space 100% of the time?
So in my examples here where it's designated with the S for special ed, it is a separate classroom.
Taken out of the classroom.
Correct.
Okay.
Right. So space is an issue.
Right.
Although the principals are great in collaborating, working, but space is an issue.
Right.
Then this student participates in recess, lunch, special classes with their typical peers, and then they have reading services in the special ed setting, and then they pack up and dismiss again with their peers. And I should say, while we're in terms of the special ed setting, for this example, it is a place, a designated classroom, et cetera. In legal terms, the special ed setting is defined by who is in that setting, which students, not that it's a particular
Physical
place
location.
or, setting. So a special ed setting is one in which all those students receive special ed services.
Thanks.
And then this example is a student who is in that category of less than 40% in the regular ed setting. You can see this student arrives, eats breakfast, and has math in the special ed setting with a special ed teacher. They go to science in a regular classroom, but in this case, that student has some adult support, meaning a teacher assistant in most instances. Then they might have speech therapy in the special ed setting. They might go to social studies, again with adult support. And then this particular student receives ABA services, Applied Behavioral Analysis, which is a methodology of teaching that a small number of students need. Then they have writing in the special ed setting. They go to recess, lunch, and specials, again with a teacher assistant. Not someone to stand by them and be their shadow, but someone to, they could be helping ensure safety for students with mobility needs. They might be helping to support social interactions with peers, those kinds of things. But we have to be careful with adult support and teacher assistance, because there is some research that says having an adult following you around, if not done well, can actually hinder social interactions. I mean, if we think about if we had someone following us, we would potentially behave differently. In terms of just a few secondary examples, for a student who's in a regular classroom most of the time, this is a 9th grade example, Algebra 1 in regular ed, CWC English, that's in the regular ed setting. What CWC means is it's a co-taught course with a general ed teacher and a special ed teacher working together in an integrated classroom with all sorts of students. Then lunch, PE, and physics, all in a regular setting. In the 40 to 79% example, this would be a student who goes to foundations of algebra. And when we talk about foundations, we're talking about a replacement special ed course that may have a different pace, possibly some modified curriculum as needed by that particular student. But then this student goes to CWC English in a regular classroom, again, co-taught, lunch and PE in a regular setting, and then learning strategies in math. So you can gather that this student needs the most support in math based on these kinds of services. And then our last example for a student who's not in the regular ed setting as much, they might start out with community-based vocational instruction. So that's job skills in a special ed setting, a Foundations of English course. They may have lunch with adult support in a regular ed setting. They may go to PE and then come out for language therapy with a speech-language pathologist. And then they might participate in Foundations of Physics, again, a special ed course. Any questions thus far? Okay. So in terms of our ability to provide the various services, we obviously have to staff classrooms. And I think we'll just focus on the numbers on the right in terms of teachers. You can see in 17-18 we had 11 special ed teachers, and the last 2 years we were fortunate to add one additional teacher position each year to meet, as we talked about earlier, the growing population of students with IEPs. We have 3 speech-language pathologists in the district, 1.5 positions of school psychologists, a half-time OT, who we share with another district nearby, and then a social worker. And then you can see at the bottom our TAs. We've had 13 the last couple years. We have bumped up to 16 this year. The asterisk is because that's a temporary position that we may not carry forward, but we had an exceptional situation where a student moved in and we needed to add that position.
Roxana, which of these are covered in our SSD agreement versus?
These are all SSD teachers.
Okay.
We have added, as you're aware, additional TAs, and when we add the TAs, it's usually because they have not yet qualified for special ed services. They're usually not transient necessarily, but students that have recently moved to us, and so we're trying to make sure that we've got everybody covered in the interim until we find out if they qualify or not. So.
And the psychologist and social worker,
Those are SSDs.
Also
We
SSDs.
also
Okay.
employ.
Great. Okay. Great.
Yep. Good question. Wanted to just share a little bit of state level data. The blue is our special ed results. This is in particular English language arts, and we're looking at the percentage of students who are scoring in the proficient and advanced categories. The blue circles are MRH students. Blue triangles are the state average. So we are slightly outperforming students across the state who have IEPs. But when you look at the blue circles as compared to the orange circles, which are MRH students without IEPs, you can see there's a significant gap in achievement in English language arts.
Ben, what do you see as far as this gap is concerned in other districts? Is anybody getting this better? I mean, the gap is really concerning to me.
Yes.
And yeah.
There is, I can tell you in most all of the county districts, there is a similar gap. It varies slightly from district to district. You can see with the triangles, blue to orange, there's a significant gap statewide. It holds nationally as well. The only places in the county where there isn't a large gap is where the general ed population isn't performing well either. But when you have a district like MRH where you have some pretty good testing results, we do see that there's a gap. Not one that we like. And at the end, I'll talk about a few recommendations that we are working on in terms of trying to chip away at that gap.
I think your math slides are an example of where we have seen some good results.
Yeah, in terms of math, again, this is the percent proficient and advanced. You can see here, again, blue is special ed, and you can see a couple years ago we were actually on the other side of the state average, and at least in 2018 and 19 we've gotten ourselves back above the state average, and we're trending in the right direction, albeit not anywhere where we ultimately need to be. And you can see the gap in terms of the blue circles and the orange circle line. Orange is the MRH non-IEP students. The gap is actually a little bit smaller in the math area, but in the end, not where we want it to be. Any questions? Any more questions about the first part of the presentation?
I was wondering, the time frames that you showed on the one slide, the 30 days, are those statutory, or is that just like the average amount of time, or?
Good question. No, those are DESE compliance statutory requirements. So we cannot exceed those.
Okay, you have to be.
We have to be that time frame or less. Yeah.
What would you say the average? Because I calculated that if you add those together, it's 120 days. But
Yeah.
what is the average response time? Probably, is it case specific?
It's case specific, and it depends a lot on how many referrals we have at a given time, because our school psychologists in most instances are the ones leading that process and doing the bulk of the assessment. So when they have more cases, it tends to be closer to the full 120-day time frame. For when we're looking at suspecting a speech impairment, like difficulty articulating your sounds, those tend to go much faster. There's not as much testing involved. There aren't as many related service providers also testing, so those can be a lot faster, and we're a little bit more nimble. But that's it's allowed by law. We try to do it as quickly as we can because, like you very quickly figured out, 120 days, 4 months, you're potentially looking at close to half of a school year.
Right.
Now, the good thing about MRH is most of the students who are being referred are already receiving some sort of intervention through MRH. So we're not doing nothing while we're carrying out the evaluation process.
Okay. Thank you.
I did want to point out too, with the assessment scores, I tell you, Rachel tells you this when you come, but remember that the state changed how students, who could take the alternative math assessment. So many of those scores now are derived from the actual test. So we used to be able to do Map A, which was an alternative assessment for special education students. Now the number of kids that can actually take the Map A is very, very, very small. So the fact that our special ed teachers have seen success and scores actually go up in math when the tests got harder, and we have almost no kids who can qualify for Map A is actually a win for us. So that's why I wanted him to point out the math scores.
Yeah, and currently we don't have any students taking the MAP alternate. So every student who is of the appropriate grade to take the state assessments is taking the standard assessment. The state became much more stringent on who was eligible for the alternate assessment. So the second part of what I want to talk to you about are course revisions and proposals, specifically at the secondary level. The first area is our science courses. And what you see on the left of your slide are the current courses being offered. This is particularly at the high school. We've had Foundations of Biology, and then we had Foundations of Science 1, 2, and 3. Did you switch me back?
Skipped math.
I knew he skipped math, but I was going to ask him to go back. I was going with it.
Okay, keep going.
And the Foundations of Science courses were a mixture of biology, physics, chemistry, those kinds of things. As we've been studying the issue this year, we're proposing that we would get rid of the Foundations of Science generic courses to align them to the specific MRH courses. So we'd have Foundations of Biology, Foundations of Physics, and Foundations of Chemistry. And that would align with the science courses that all other students are experiencing. And the curriculum that we would be basing our foundations courses off of would be the MRH curriculum.
So you're doing the same with math then too?
Can we go to the, oh, you did go to math, thank you. So in the past, in terms of math, we've had Foundations of Algebra 1, Foundations of Geometry, and Foundations of Advanced Algebra, which is a relic, if you will, of when MRH also offered advanced algebra. So really all we're doing here, again, is realigning to the courses that MRH is currently offering. And then the base of these courses, the curriculum for our course, the foundations course, would be the MRH course. And then within that, we would be adapting and modifying to meet the needs of the individual learners in those courses. The next courses I want to talk about are our learning strategies courses. These are not linked to or associated with any particular MRH course. These are unique to the special ed programming. In the middle school, we have offered just an overall learning strategies course for several years. And we are proposing to break that up into a learning strategies academic focused course and then a learning strategies social skills course. Because we have seen over the last several years an increasing need to provide social skills instruction for a number of our learners. So this will be an opportunity for a dedicated course to provide that instruction. At the high school level, we've had learning strategies reading and learning strategies math. Same concept as at the middle school. What we're proposing is to add a learning strategies social skills course as well. Because just because they're growing up does not mean they don't still need social skills instruction at times. The purpose of the courses are to provide students opportunities to reflect on their learning, to develop effective learning habits, to develop self-advocacy skills, and then in addition to those things, get content area support, particularly in those math and the reading learning strategies courses. So the focus areas in the learning strategies courses will be essentially the same from middle school through high school. The complexity and the level of the work will increase as the students get older and are able. But we're going to focus on students developing organizational systems, study skills, self-awareness skills. We've been about 3 years now working on students leading their own IEP meetings as they're able. Similar concept to student-led conferences, but doing that with the IEP meetings. Focusing on some 21st century skills in terms of technology use, appropriate safety with technology. And then at the high school only, we're doing more work with transition to post-high school. The learning strategies courses will align to Missouri Comprehensive School Counseling Program standards and or the appropriate content area, Missouri Learning Standards. The other main area that I want to share with you this evening in terms of course revisions and proposals is a pre-vocational strand. Right now in the middle school, we have a pilot of a life skills course. And this whole pre-vocational strand is to help students start to develop hands-on job skills as well as the social skills needed to find success in a workplace environment. Now at the middle school and early high school, this is still happening on campus here in MRH. So we'd like to take that pilot life skills course and make it a permanent course offering at the middle school. And then at the high school, we've had community-based vocational instruction. 9th and 10th grade, that program would be here on campus, doing various jobs. We have right now a young man who waters the plants. He has a series of steps, task analyzed. How do you go to the different plants? How do you find out if they need water? How much water do you give them? Those sorts of things. And then at the 11th and 12th grade level, if students are interested and families are supportive, we have off-campus sites. Currently we're at the Hilton downtown, and those students go 4 mornings a week, and they learn directly from Hilton staff about how to take care of the breakfast bar, how to set it up, break it down, how to remove plates from patrons' tables. There's some cleaning involved, those kinds of things. So they're getting real-world experience, learning in a real environment. And then we also, of course, send them with special ed staff for support and instruction as necessary. The pre-vocational courses will have some daily living components, some personal safety, those interpersonal needs and skills, and then identifying job interests will be a focus area too. And the pre-vocational courses are also aligned to the Missouri guidance curriculum, as well as a document created by a special school district called the Local Industry Standards. That was a document that was developed with various agencies, local colleges, to outline what kinds of skills will be needed by our graduates to succeed in various work environments, whether it's competitive employment, supported employment, adult day settings, those kinds of things. So we're aligning to those standards as well. So in terms of recommendations for moving forward with the special ed program, first recommendation is to continue to try to increase the quality of our co-teaching partnerships by providing ongoing professional development, coaching, feedback, because we want to, when we have two teachers together, we're investing a lot of human resource in that particular setting. We want to make sure that they are working at their maximum ability, intensifying instruction, and using that opportunity to really differentiate effectively for all learners in that class. In terms of literacy, we're providing special ed staff ongoing training and coaching in specific high-yield instructional strategies that research has indicated are effective. Same thing in numeracy, teaching staff high-yield instructional strategies. And SSD is moving towards a professional development model of a mastery model. In other words, you can't just go to a training, attend, and then go about your business as normal. You have to demonstrate that you're understanding the content, and through job-embedded coaching, that your instructional practices are actually changing. That will be an ongoing focus. In terms of the social-emotional supports that many of our students need, we are working to increase the number of gen ed and special ed staff who have training in functional assessment and behavior intervention. And the last couple of years, we've had groups going to training provided by SSD that have included special ed teachers, school psychologists. Many of our assistant principals have attended, so that's moving in the right direction. Of course, as we've just talked in terms of social emotional, we want to add those learning strategies sections specifically for social skills. And then we want to make sure that all staff understand how to implement effectively accommodations and modifications that kids need in order to level that playing field and to give them a fair chance to demonstrate their knowledge. And then finally, this one doesn't really relate to anything we've talked about so far, but we have a parent who is working on getting a parent advisory council going, a group of parents of students with disabilities, and so we want to partner with them and support them as they move forward and try to get their group up and running. Any questions that come to mind at this point?
I don't have any questions, but I've really been waiting for this part just so I can say how exciting this is. This is just amazing, and I really appreciate how you guys have worked to just be hyper-focused on inclusion and also how that's affecting like the educational equity for our students.
Mm-hmm.
It's just awesome. Thank you so much.
Oh,
Yeah.
sure. Thank you.
I've
And
had the pleasure of having my kids go through that program and seeing how it's been implemented, and it definitely is amazing, and it is, you know, I think the way you started out talking about how our kids deserve, are entitled to be included, to feel a part of, you know, the community and what we're doing, and not to be isolated. And I've seen this in action, and I am very impressed, but also with the fact that we're still asking questions. What can we do better?
Right.
What can we do more of? Where is there still a gap? What can we do to bridge that gap? So, you know, the fact that we're not sitting around and, you know, patting on backs, but we're still actively working to improve is amazing. So just hats off.
Thank you. And to be fair, the inclusive nature of MRH, the collaborative nature, starts with you all, with Dr. Hall, Mrs. Meacham, and the principals. I mean, you all have hired a great group of principals who believe that all kids in MRH belong here in MRH. So hats off to MRH as well.
Thank you. Thank you,
Yep.
Ben.
The impetus to align the new proposed curriculum more with the general student population's curriculum, is that because there's now thinking that addresses the gap more directly, or is that the impetus, or is there another?
Partially it's to address the gap, although you know, the gap happens earlier, younger, but when we are not aligned, and if we're not basing off the MRH core curriculum, it can lead to kids not being exposed to that rigorous curriculum like they should be. And if you're not exposed to it, there is no possibility you're going to learn it. So we want to make sure that our kids, all kids, have the opportunity to be exposed to the curriculum and opportunities to learn it. So that's part of the impetus as well.
Thank you.
Sure.
Ben, I can just remember years ago when we just longed to have SSD truly be a partner with us and lock arms with us, and now I don't even feel like you're a partner, I just feel like you're the family. So
Yeah.
kudos to you, and thanks for all your hard work on this.
Thank you.
And to your team.
Yep. The staff are the ones doing the work every day. So. Thank you.
Very much. Thank you.
Yep.
Dr. Adams? Okay, a little bit of a disclaimer for those of you that are following along. Jason noticed a slight error in the slide, so I pulled that down to put the new one back up. So now you have two. The one that has the PowerPoint at the end is the correct one. I cannot get it to reconvert to a PDF, so I left the old one and put the new one. He will be talking from the one that says PowerPoint at the end, okay? And I'll fix it later.
Sometimes you do have to refresh for those changes to show up on your end.
Is it the one that says final K6 or just says K6?
It says. Literacy program evaluation, not the one that says final.
Yep. Got it.
Okay.
Thanks.
Well, good evening to all of you, and you know, it's been a long evening up to this point already for many of you, but let's talk reading and writing for a little while. So my charge tonight is to present our program evaluation for K-6 literacy. And so within K-6 literacy, we're talking about reading, we're talking about phonics, comprehension, fluency. Writing, we're talking about spelling, grammar, actual writing process, all of those pieces. So it's a lot of things fall within the literacy framework. To give us a little bit of history about the work that has been done up to this point in literacy, my first year at MRH was 2012, 2013, and my charge was to, at that time, work with our ELA work in terms of integrating the Common Core standards at that time into the work that we were doing. And so we started that process in 2012, 2013. That led us to 2013-14, where we brought forth a proposal to change to a reading and a writing workshop structure so how we go about teaching reading and writing within the classroom, and to also revise our literacy frameworks. Then for several years, we worked through that process. We also added a literacy coach as part of staffing in order to help us, K-6, do that work, which brought us to 2016-2017, where we presented the revised literacy frameworks to the Board of Education at that time. That same year, the Missouri Learning Standards were adopted, and we started some of the process all over again. And so I don't want to say we completely changed everything, but we changed a lot of it. And so, which led us to 2017-18, where we started the process to align our curriculum with the Missouri Learning Standards in both reading and in writing. Then in 2018-2019, Missouri passed the dyslexia law, which went into effect. And with that brought a whole other element of work that needed to be done within literacy as far as looking at our intervention programming, looking at parent communication, making sure that we had all of the appropriate assessments in place to make sure that we were screening appropriately to match the requirements of the dyslexia law. And we also continued the work with implementing the Missouri Learning Standards in both reading and writing. And then this year, the Missouri released their state literacy plan. And so what I've done tonight is I've laid out our program evaluation using the same key areas that Missouri has used for their literacy plan. And so hopefully we'll see some alignment between what Missouri has done up to this point and what MRH has done. Okay? Lots of changes and lots of work, but hopefully in a little while you'll see some of our assessment results, and we've been able to maintain and continue to grow in a lot of areas. All right, so the 5 key areas within the Missouri State Literacy Plan include leadership and sustainability, standards-based curriculum, intentional instruction, intervention, and enrichment, assessment, and then partnerships, so community partnerships as it relates to literacy. These are the 5 areas that I'll walk through related to our program evaluation tonight. That's essentially what that shares. So leadership and sustainability. So we have a shared leadership approach here at MRH, and so I'm the K-6 literacy administrator, if you will, but there are many, many other people involved in this work and involved in this conversation. The first would be our K-6 reading cat, which is our curriculum action team, and then we also have a K-6 writing cat. And our main work revolves around having representation from all of our grade levels, teacher leadership, and we often review the curriculum and our instructional practice. We also have a CAT leadership team, and so one Monday a month, ECC and elementary, K-6, all of our CAT leadership for math, literacy, social studies, science, social emotional, we all come together so that to make sure that we have some continuity in the work that we're doing, and then we break off to do and plan our specific content work that we're doing. And then we also have our literacy instructional coach who is responsible for in-classroom modeling, helping whenever new staff come on board, showing them the MRH way as it relates to literacy. And then in addition, all of those are then led and lead up to TLC, where we share with all of the other content areas, K-12, and also include parent partnerships as well. Standards-based curriculum. At this point, we are aligned to the Missouri Learning Standards. We use our Understanding by Design framework, which I know all of you are familiar with. Which also includes Enduring Understandings, Essential Questions, the Knowledge and Skills piece, and what you see there, the actual image that's there is a template that we use in order to create stage 1 of our Understanding by Design curriculum. Leading to intentional instruction, intervention, and enrichment, and so I'm going to use the language of the tiers, so the RTI tiers, Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3, just to kind of walk us through what this looks like. So when we talk about Tier 1, we're talking about what reading and writing looks like in the homeroom classroom. And so within reading and writing workshop, there is often, or should be often, a whole class time where the whole class comes together looking at grade level work. We typically call that a mini lesson, where the teacher is doing direct instruction around a particular reading skill or a particular writing skill. We also have time built in where we have what we call read aloud time. And that read aloud time is an opportunity for the teacher to model for kids how all of those individual skills play out, and to also do think alouds, and again, modeling for kids how all of those pieces come together. Within Reading Workshop, after the whole class lesson, then everyone breaks off and they start to do their own individual thing as it relates to independent reading and independent writing. And so independent reading, everyone at that point is reading a book at their own level. Independent writing, everyone is working on their own writing piece. The teacher's role during that time is to pull small groups of kids or to meet individually with individual kids to specifically target the individual needs of the kids in the group or the individual kid, depending on the needs of the entire class. So in one classroom, you may see a teacher spending more time with 10 individual students because they all 10 have individual needs. In the classroom next door, you may see a teacher pulling 2 or 3 small groups because the kids in those 3 groups all have similar needs, and it's easier and more efficient to pull a small group than to teach an individual child. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. But again, the key that I want to point out is after that whole class lesson, when we break up into small groups or we break up into individual work, it's an opportunity for both intervention and additional support, and it's also an opportunity for enrichment for kids who have already mastered the content and need a little bit more. Then we move to Tier 2, which typically happens outside of the regular classroom. And so Ben spoke a little bit about reading intervention or some of the interventions that lead up to potential special education intervention. And so the way that works with our reading intervention program, that could look several different ways. We have targeted small group instruction, and so a kid will experience literacy in their homeroom classroom, but then they, in addition to that, get small group reading instruction from a reading specialist or a reading interventionist. We also, within that structure, have limited one-on-one instruction for kids who have unique needs or for kids who have been in a small group reading intervention program but need something a little bit more. We typically will meet one-on-one with them. We also just recently started this summer, or this year, an after-school reading program in grades 3 through 6 for kids who were on the cusp of being at grade level. We're not quite at grade level, but we also didn't want them missing other content like science, social studies in order for them to go to reading intervention. And so we created a reading intervention after-school club that meets 2 days a week for an hour, and we're seeing at this point some pretty great success with that program as well. All right, so you all are familiar with RTI and the way that that works, but in order to talk through this, I want to share this model with you as we think about how it relates to literacy and about how we problem solve for individual kids. And so we all know that we screen all of our students multiple times a year. We use our STAR 360 data to do that. We also look at our MAP data. We also use in literacy an assessment called the FMP, where we get individual levels on individual kids, which matches the individual reading levels that each of the kids would be reading at. We then analyze that data, and from there we collaboratively determine placement and intervention. And so what that looks like is 4 times a year we meet with grade level teams once we have a new set of data. The reading intervention team, the classroom teachers for each grade level, me, our literacy coach, we sit down, we look at that data, we talk about who's making progress, who's not making progress, what additional changes do we need to do in terms of reading intervention. Beyond that, our reading intervention team, they meet monthly on the mornings of our early release days. We cancel reading intervention for that day because the schedule is already messed up a little bit, and we use that morning. We progress monitor all of our kids who are in reading intervention. We look at who's making progress, who's kind of stalling, who hasn't made progress, and at that point we problem solve around what additional things or what changes we need to make to their intervention plan. I'll talk more about that in just a second. Then from there, we adjust the plan as needed. So overall, I shared that overall we've been in a pretty good place as far as our literacy scores go. These are our MAP scores, most recent MAP scores, and so what you can see is we are within 10 to 14% at all grade levels above the state average in terms of our overall ELA scores related to the MAP. Now, as Ben shared, there is a gap. You all know there's a gap. I know that there's a gap. And so in terms of talking about specific gaps tonight, I want to walk you through a couple of slides just related to this because I think it's, for me, it's a different way of looking at potential underserved populations. And so on this particular slide, the first graph that you'll see are students who pay the full price for lunch. The second slide are students who pay their free or reduced priced rate for lunch. And so we use this to determine socioeconomic status. What you're not going to see are percentages if you look to the left on the scale. These are actual numbers of kids that we have in each of the groups. And so I'll start all the way over on the right, my right, and walk you all the way to the left. And so what you'll see on the first graph, under full pay, those are students who have been identified as Black. The middle section, those are students who are identified as multiracial. And then we have white students, and these are all at the full pay rate. Okay? Then if you move to the second graph, these are students who qualify based on their ethnicity, students who qualify for free and reduced priced lunch. And so what I want to point out is, yes, there is a racial gap in terms of our literacy and instruction and in terms of our literacy achievement. At the same time, there's a considerable gap in terms of free and reduced price lunch and opportunity and access. And so I will be talking in our recommendations about some of the things that we would propose to address that, but I believe I'm coming back to you in a couple of months with a title recommendation or a title evaluation, and I'll be speaking a little bit about parent engagement and some of the things that we plan to do as a part of our title programming as well, okay? The next slide really looks at, the first slide was just focused on grades 3 through 6. This next slide focuses on K2. And so this is using a different assessment. This is our STAR Early Lit assessment. And you will see, again, a similar trajectory. You'll see a similar pattern in what's happening with our data. I do want to point out, and this was part of the change that we needed to make, you'll notice that there are 6 different graphs on each of the charts. The first graph for each ethnicity would be our fall benchmark data. The second would be our latest assessment in winter, okay? And so in most situations, you are seeing a decrease in terms of the number of students who are achieving at a lower level. But what I want to point out is the number of overall kids. If I can walk up here. Chris told me not to wander, but I need to point. So if you look at these 2 graphs, you'll notice that overall, in the fall, we were assessing 160 kids. Then in the winter, we were assessing around 130. The reason that dropped is because when kids in 2nd grade get to a certain level on STAR Early Lit, they no longer take STAR Early Lit. They move into STAR Reading, which is a different assessment, a more complex assessment. So on the next slide, what you'll see is an actual opposite of these 2 graphs. You'll see more kids in the winter being assessed under STAR Reading than were assessed in the fall. Does that make sense?
It means it
They
made
moved
progress. They
out.
made progress.
Yeah.
Exactly, they made progress, and we moved them to another assessment, okay? But again, the overall pattern I want to point out is the access pattern. Then if we move to the next slide, again, broken up the same way, this is now STAR Reading for grades 1 through 6. And so again, if you notice in terms of, let's just focus on free and reduced price lunch. Within free and reduced price lunch, we have 70 to 73 students who are identified as Black. Grades 1 through 6, we have 30 to 35 students who are identified as multiracial. And then for whites, we have 75 to a little over 80 students who are identified as white. But all of these students are part of our free and reduced price lunch program. If you look over here, you can't compare the overall numbers because the scale changes. So when we're looking at the white percentages of students who pay the full lunch price, we're now talking about 330 to 350 students in the white columns. Down here, as we look at Black, we're talking around 25 to 30 individual students. And in terms of multiracial, we're talking around 40 students. Okay? So please don't compare this set of graphs to this set of graphs because the scales are not the same. Okay? But again, the point that I want to make is this access piece across racial lines. Yes, there's still a divide race-wise, but overall, we're seeing an access pattern as well. All right, so earlier I mentioned our problem-solving process using RTI. This is one particular student. I'm going to show you two student scenarios. This is a student who has attended MRH since kindergarten at ECC. What you'll notice on my right-hand side are individual student scores related to STAR Early Lit and then moving into STAR Reading. And so you'll notice the bottom score, the blue box or the blue square, that's when this said student graduated from STAR Early Lit and then moved into STAR Reading. You'll notice that for STAR, this student kind of started making progress, but the scores were inconsistent. And so we continued to meet about the student. We continued to problem solve around this student. At the same time, we used a second set of data, which would be our FMP score, which is the second graph that you'll have there. And what you're noticing, hopefully, is that the student continued to make progress on this one assessment. And so looking at all of this information along with our progress monitoring information and conversation with the classroom teacher, we were able to put a plan in place, and that student has now graduated our reading intervention program. He's now participating in our after-school program 2 days a week, and with the plan of him moving back into the classroom completely. The next slide, which has lately become a bit of a typical story for us, is a student who moved into the district from another district within the last couple of years, and so came to us with some pretty significant reading needs. And I'm pleased to say, looking at both of those graphs, you can see some inconsistency in terms of STAR score, but continued to make progress under FMP, and this student has also graduated our reading intervention program and is back in the classroom, okay? So that's one way that we use our problem-solving process. That's one outcome of our problem-solving process, I guess I should say. For some of our kids, we see that continued red and yellow box pattern, and we need to have conversations with the family. We need to problem solve as a team, and sometimes that leads us to bringing in, as Ben talked about, our special education process and looking at that level of intervention. So there are many different directions that we can take depending on the needs of kids. But the piece that I want to point out under our Missouri Learning Plan and the MRH Learning Plan, Literacy Plan, excuse me, is that we had those structures in place in order to be able to problem solve around individual kids. Okay, and we're doing that.
Thank you to the board for giving you the staffing to allow us to put the staffing in place so that that can happen with the frequency that it's currently happening. So that has been some hard work that they've done within the last 5 years that we didn't have prior to that.
And we're seeing results. All right, so then as a part of this, last year we brought to you our MRH dyslexia plan, and we've spent the year implementing that, and we've learned some things through that process, like most people do when you're trying something for the first time. And so what we're doing as part of this program evaluation is also asking for you to approve a revised version of our dyslexia plan. And really the main piece that we're revising would be the assessment piece. And so some of the additional assessments that we added weren't quite giving us the information that we wanted. And so we've removed them, and we've added in a few additional assessments that are giving us information that will really help us to target individual needs. And so those assessments are reflected there and are reflected in the other document that you have called the revised dyslexia plan, okay? All right, so then another key area would be partnerships for literacy. And these include, especially at ECC, they have mentorship relationships with some of our students. They do not primarily focus on literacy, but literacy is a component of that mentorship program. In addition to that, our PTOs, I can't begin to tell you how thankful I am for the work of our PTOs and how far we have come in terms of our PTO work. But I do have to specifically mention, in terms of the literacy plan, the book giveaways that happen at MRHE, and also the partnership that ECC has with the Dolly Parton Library. In terms of that access pattern that I talked about, that is a great venue or great avenue for us to be able to continue to reach kids who don't have access to literacy. And so I would love for us to continue to pursue how we can expand that and to use that as an opportunity to partner with our families and to provide access for our kids. The third area is our MRH Title Committee program. And so again, I mentioned that, but I'll be coming back to you, I believe, in a couple of months with that piece. But that, again, our Title Committee includes all of the interventionists. It also includes parents, and our main focus with that conversation is on underserved populations and how we're using our federal funds to best support those particular kids. And then finally, our partnership with our Maplewood and Richmond Heights public libraries. Typically, as we get to May, the librarians from those programs come and present at each of the schools. They talk about summer reading programs that kids can participate in that are free. And so I would love for us to continue to look at how we can enhance those particular partnerships. All right, so findings. There are a lot of them. Our literacy leadership team and CAT structure, they are strong and they are in place. Our instructional coaching is in a very strong place. We have a well-developed Tier 1 in terms of instruction for both reading and writing workshop across the buildings, K-6. We do have a need for a specific phonics curriculum program or resource for K-2. We have additional need for formative and summative assessments to be developed for K-6. And so I spoke a lot about STAR and the FMP, and those are screening or benchmark assessments that we have, but we also have a need for day-to-day in the classroom assessments that classroom teachers can continue to monitor the progress of individual kids outside of even the reading intervention program. And so we want to continue to develop that. In addition to that, our response intervention or RTI system, they are in place for K-6, which includes screening assessments, problem-solving protocols, and progress monitoring tools.
Can I stop you just a minute?
Sure.
Is this 60-some odd pages?
Yes.
Yeah, so Jason worked with a reading consultant, been working with us for a couple years now. So I just wanted to point that out. It's in your document. We're going to ask you to approve this literacy plan, but what I'm so very pleased with is that entire process is spelled out in great detail. What entrance criteria looks like, what exit criteria looks like, exactly what we would be doing based on what we found. So this is like gold to me, right? So I'm very, very pleased that this exists, and this is one of the things we'll be asking you to approve.
And it's very much structured the way that this presentation is. So, okay. In addition to that, our findings are that we want to continue to pursue additional interventions that can be used for Tier 2 and Tier 3 instruction that specifically target individual needs. And standards and curriculum resource alignment in 3 through 6 are in place. I'll talk about that when we get to the recommendations piece. And then strong overall achievement in literacy across the grade levels and a continued need to support our underserved populations in literacy. So recommendations, and again, there are a lot of those. I'll try to get as much done by the end of June as I can. I made that promise to Roxanna.
Yes.
All
You
of
have
it.
to do every one of them.
Yeah. You put the slide together, man.
So one of the goals, and ECC, they're well into the process for this. They've been doing quite a bit of study around what phonics instruction looks like so that we can be in a place to choose a program or a resource that can support the work that we need to do. But we need to select a core phonics curriculum resource for K-2. We need to do some work around aligning the new curriculum resources that we have in K-2 with the Missouri Learning Standards. So we have that in place for 3rd through 6th grade. We need to make sure that that is in place, the alignment is in place for K-2 so that we have a strong K-6 approach. We want to embed the grammar standards into the existing writing units for authentic learning. And so as we're talking about pronouns and nouns and verbs and all of those things, we want to put it into an opportunity where kids can then transfer it into their own authentic writing rather than just doing a worksheet, circling the verb, and then forgetting it 10 minutes later. And so there's a need for that, but there's a need for transferring that to their own writing. Continue to develop the formative and summative assessments aligned to the Missouri Learning Standards. Continue to add research-based intervention resources for phonics, comprehension, and fluency. And really what that means is as we continue to use our RTI process and as we get to know our kids and really explore the unique needs that they have, also in light of the dyslexia work that's happening, we continue to run into, I don't want to say issues, but we stumble into needs that we need additional resources in order to be able to individualize for kids. And so continuing to explore what's out there, what other districts are using in order to be able to continue to target and do the best we can for individual kids.
You'll hear Carla talk more about that later at the middle school as well.
In addition to that, continue to add diverse and relevant level text for classroom and school libraries to ensure instructional experiences that allow for students to see themselves and others. And so not just books that are in place that reflect all of our kids, but books that are also at levels for kids so that they can access those books. Okay? Continue to provide professional learning for K-6 staff related to differentiated and culturally relevant instruction, particular in literacy, in order to continue to provide responsive teaching and learning. And I would ask that you approve the K-6 60-page literacy plan that Roxana talked about, and also our revised K-12 dyslexia plan. So at that, yes. So at that point, what questions do you have?
I have a couple questions.
Sure.
Even though I do see that in some cases the gap is being lessened, it still seems to be that there's such a significant gap with our minority children. And I do appreciate talking about free and reduced lunches and how that also affects the gap, but I'm concerned that we're kind of grouping them together and not necessarily also being very,
Sure.
I know you're being very intentional, but being a little more intentional of making sure that we're not grouping them in that and addressing those issues, but ignoring how maybe race is still playing a role and how these poor children are being, are still not getting the reading and the writing and the grades that they need to be successful. Obviously, I've not read the whole 60-page, but can you kind of point out in there how that's addressing maybe that area of it?
So I think for me, the recommendation around the culturally responsive instruction piece is something that we have been doing as a district over the last 2 years. We need to continue that work, especially in light of literacy and what that looks like. And so for me, that looks like our instructional approach. For me, that looks like the resources we're using. For me, that looks like partnering with families. And so it's not just one of those pieces, it's all of those pieces being put together.
Can we track how that's helping our students of different races?
So I would say yes, we could monitor, once all of those pieces are in place, we could monitor our student learning data, and hopefully we would see a decrease in our gaps that we have.
One of the issues that Jason and I have explored, and we have looked in lots of places, he mentioned it, but I'll point it out. One of the things we're really concerned about is getting culturally relevant literature in the hands of children, and there's a publishing problem, quite honestly, to get the right reading levels. The choices of what we have often don't reflect the students that we would want to give that with. So we're faced with making sure that there's culturally rich literature in the buildings, but it's often not at the appropriate reading levels, like real early lit. There's just a gap in publishing. So it's getting better. It's not great. I've sent several leveled reader selections over for them to review, and we get really excited about it, and then we dig into the quality of the text, and it's sometimes surface appropriate, but the text quality isn't a good match for the kids' reading level. So that's not an excuse. We're going to continue to search, but it is something that we are looking at, and we've added pieces. We have a ways more to go.
And I would even add to that our PTO this year started the conversation around Scholastic. They're learning, but I wouldn't say they've been 100% on board in terms of their offerings at book fairs that we have and how we often use them as a resource. But there's a bookstore here in St. Louis called I See Me, and so they've been offering quite a bit of books, and they're also in a position where they're doing book fairs for families as well, and so our PTO has looked at potentially partnering with them in addition to Scholastic to make sure that we have a wide variety of resources that our families and our school can access that are at a high level and high quality.
That's happening now. Yeah.
I have one other question too. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Real quick before you go ahead. Another thing that we've done at the ECC in particular, we asked you to fund last year some online resources. Pebble Go is the one. And so we've also found, Paula has dug around, and she's found an addition that we'll be asking for next year that's not very much money, but opens up a whole other online database for kids. So we're hoping that can also be a place that we go.
My other question was the limited target, or limited target reading. how much of an opportunity is there for that in the classroom? I know that we've got a great curriculum and the teachers really work hard to get to all of the students, but just realistically, with the time frame of a class, how much time is that? And then do we have any resources available for those kids that do need the limited targeting to get it outside of the classroom setting? Because my concern is, if you've got, say, 6 kids that really do need that, how are they gonna get it in a span of what, 45 minutes maybe?
Sure, you nailed it. So within an hour, let's just talk about reading for just a second. So within a 1 hour reading workshop, typically 10 to 15 minutes of that is that whole class where everyone's together, instruction. And then the next 45 minutes is then used to pull small groups or to individualize for kids. And so what we've said to the staff is you can use any variation of individual work or any type of small group work. So within small group, we have guided reading, which is a very formal process. We have book club conversations, which is more focused on comprehension. But we ask teachers to use any combination of that matches the needs of their kids. And so what I tried to explain earlier was the 2 classes next to each other. One teacher may be individually meeting with kids because there are 10 different needs within that class. The teacher next door may be pulling small groups because they have similar needs within those groups, and that's the more efficient way of going about doing that. But you're right, Brandy. It's 45 minutes to potentially see anywhere from 18 to 23, 24 kids, depending on the grade level. And so typically what would happen is the child is met with, if they're participating in a tier 2 or tier 3 intervention outside of the classroom, we ask that they are met with 4 to 5 times a week with their classroom teacher as well in a small group. And so they're getting the whole class lesson. They're also meeting with their grade level teacher 4 to 5 times a week, and 5 times a week they're getting seen by a reading specialist outside of the classroom. Everyone else is then meeting typically 2 to 3 times in a small group or in an independent situation beyond that. But everyone within a week's time should be meeting with the teacher at their level.
You will see that elementary, ECC, middle school, and high school are each asking for increase in staffing in either reading specialist or math specialist support based on scaling of our increasing enrollment and what we're seeing. So we do need some additional bodies. I'll be bringing those proposals to you at a later date, but that is something we're very much looking at, because that's key. Getting the right books in the kids' hands and then getting enough personnel to meet with kids based on their individual needs is really the 2 areas that we're looking at the most. Structurally, we feel like our structures are solid. Very pleased with the plan that they put together in terms of making sure that we're measuring and monitoring appropriately and that we know what our criteria and cutoffs are. So at this point, it's just getting all hands on deck and leveraging what we have to try to get as much intensive intervention as early as we can.
And I will add to that, our classroom teachers have done a lot of problem solving within their team. And so let's say if you're talking about a 3rd grade team and one teacher has a student at this particular level and another teacher at that grade level has a similar student at that same level, they don't necessarily have the availability to meet within themselves, but this teacher may trade a student at another level to this teacher, and this teacher may then meet with this student so that all of the kids are getting met with at their appropriate instructional level. So we do a lot of problem solving within the grade level as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Not right now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you all.
The reading intervention course change proposal.
Hello, I am Carla Pisani Rovira, and I am the middle school reading specialist and instructional coach. And I want to talk to you guys about a course change proposal for our literacy. So middle school literacy, it is a tier 2 intervention. So it does not take away from any of our students' core instruction. It replaces one of their elective courses. It is an assigned intervention based on some entrance and exit criteria. But it's additional reading support, and what we're trying to do is close the gap between where the student is currently in the reading and where we want them to be. We provide some more small group direct instruction. The classes typically have between 4 and 8 students, which is what the International Reading Association recommends as appropriate. We work in the areas of word identification, fluency, comprehension, and vocabulary. So this chart here on the left is what the International Reading Association recommends we go through when we try to identify students. And we do follow that process. So you'll see on the right here, it talks about what we specifically do at MRH. We start with a universal screener, which all of our students get the STAR literacy assessment. They get it 3 times per year. And what we do from there is we look at any student who is at 30 percentile or below, and we look at additional information for those students. So we look at their MAP scores, we look at their grades, we interview the teachers to see kind of what's going on and whether they think students do need intervention. If they are showing problems in 2 or more of those areas, that's when I meet with them. I pull them aside and I give them an informal assessment to see, is this really a reading problem or is there something else going on? If it is an identified reading problem where they can benefit from the intervention, then they are placed into the course. So currently, our middle school literacy program is called Journeys in Reading. When it was developed, it was designed around a specific program, which is Voyager-Sopris, their reading Journeys program. So the current material that we have right now is really outdated. And some of the problems with it is that it's only available at 1 reading level. So it's really not meeting the needs of all of our students. They also don't take into account student interest, where they are, and their learning profiles. Another issue with it is that there's not a lot of opportunities for reading, speaking, and listening, and those are 4 of the areas that when we look at the Missouri learning standards are all included there. We also don't currently have a spelling assessment that goes along with it, and it's not currently aligned to the Missouri learning standards. It also doesn't allow us to have a smooth transition between what they're doing at the elementary school, which Jason was talking about, and what's going on at the high school. Currently at the elementary school, their reading intervention uses LLI, which is leveled literacy intervention. And at the high school, they're looking more strategies-based and using the materials from their core content. So we want to be able to have a combination of that at the middle school to help bridge that. So the purpose of changing this course, we want to have a more flexible integration of research-based components of reading, and we want to be able to match the students' needs and align it with the Missouri Learning Standards. And this is kind of what we want it to look like as we go along. We are going to design it around 6 research-based strategies that have been identified that proficient readers use. You can see what those are there, but we'll also have a word study component. We have a really wide range of readers at the middle school. Research shows that the gap at middle school tends to get even bigger. So I have some students in intervention who are 1 or 2 grade levels behind. I have some students who are as low as a 1st grade level. And we tend to see the lower students are ones who are transfer students, so they do make progress as they come in. But especially the last couple years, we've found a need for some phonics instruction, which typically doesn't happen at the middle school. Also, we want to have the ability to use any resource that we need that will match what our students currently need. And like I said before, we want to be able to bridge the transitions between the schools. These strategies that we talk about at the top, those can also be aligned to the Missouri Learning Standards, which we don't currently have. So the timeline I'm presenting to you guys now. Over the summer, we'd like to write the curriculum and have time to collaborate with our consultant, which Roxana mentioned earlier. and we want to be able to offer this to our identified students as early as the fall. This is a proposed budget. We'll need time for curriculum writing, which about 24 hours is what we're proposing. Teacher resources, we need a few different assessments and diagnostics, and I've listed some that we think we might need, as well as a spelling assessment, which Jason showed you guys earlier. At the middle and high school, we are looking at Words Their Way, specifically because we need a dyslexia screener, and that's the spelling component there. Also asking for some money for mentor texts, especially to improve diversity, and expanding the classroom library. So that is looking again to make sure that we have appropriate books for all of our students. So expanding the genres, and within those, the availability of Lexile levels, and more diversity of both characters and authors. So, yeah, that's good. I was just gonna say total that we're asking for is $2,000. Questions?
Thanks for coming tonight.
It was great.
Appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you very much.
James Gardner, E-rate update, please.
I like to have a backup copy just in case I can't read it off the screen myself.
This is for the guests at home.
We don't trust Christina.
I'm James Gardner. I am the District IT Manager for MRH. This presentation is about E-rate for the 2020-2021 school year. E-rate has been around since about 1995. Its original purpose was to essentially bring the internet to everywhere it wasn't in terms of schools and libraries. It's administered by the Universal Service Administrative Company, a federal affiliated, essentially it's a company set up to administer the funds. Historically, we have leveraged E-rate monies to replace wireless access points, network switches, firewalls, routers, some of the wiring depending on what year and what projects we had available. In the last 5 years or so, in addition to the core mission of bringing internet everywhere, the program has been specifically designed to bring wireless into the schools as part of it, not surprisingly coinciding with the proliferation of a lot of wireless devices. This is the end of the current 5-year modernization plan, and specifically the end of a 2-year funding cycle. So the money that is available to us this year is kind of a use it or lose it proposition, which is one of the reasons why, unlike say last year where I was looking for relatively small numbers of options, this year we're actually looking to replace wholesale most of our, if not all of our wireless gear and a number of our core switches and routers. Most of that equipment is legitimately 3 years old. It's not like we're replacing new upon new. So just to break down, Category 1 services are the things like bringing the internet to the building and then connecting the buildings, all of which is fiber optic these days, with the exception of a cable line that's run upstairs. Those services are under, well, we're coming into the year 3 of a 3-year contract, so they will be up next year. Category 2 services, which also include the wiring piece, we have at least a tacit eye toward the construction that might come about as a result of the proposition that's on the ballot. The timing of it looks like if we file for that next year, we would actually be able to recoup some of the wiring costs, obviously pending a restructuring of the funding model that really is independent of what this year's money. But just as an eye forward, we have that, and also the equipment that would necessarily be involved in an expansion of facilities in general, more wireless access points, more switches, perhaps an additional data space. to go along with that. To give you an idea of kind of, you know, an average wireless access point, I mean, people look at it and see a piece of plastic and metal in the ceiling. They don't necessarily realize that that can be, say, $500 to $700 each. You know, an edge network switch that goes in one of the closets is $5,000. A core can be $50,000 or more. Admittedly, some of that's retail pricing and our E-rate match, which is keyed based on per pupil expenditure, as well as the National Student Lunch Program or free and reduced lunch percentage. You know, historically, we've had a very good match, and this has been a very good deal for MRH as a whole over the last 25 years, and I'm pretty sure we filed for it ever since 1995 as a result. They do fund additional items like battery backup that will, you know, cover kind of the infrastructure type items. The firewall is a possibility, but it's probably the last thing on the list. It's just something that they do fund as an option. Some of that turns it into a bit of a cloud service as opposed to something you'd actually have locally here. Some of the analytics, some of the, if you will, advanced threat protection type of things. I mean, luckily, we are not at the point where we're dealing with nation state actors here, thankfully. We actually structurally have missed a lot of the possibilities for that, in part because we actually moved a number of our services like Student Information Service, our financial and human resource systems into the cloud. So we're leveraging their protection instead of our own. That has benefited us immensely. If you look at the districts that have hit by ransomware, those that have been the least impacted were the ones that were hosting the least amount of stuff themselves. Again, that just goes to the big picture item that E-rate covers. Are there any questions about what E-rate is, what it covers? We'll be coming back either in March or April with an actual explicit list of what we're looking at and an itemized cost structure to go with that.
I would imagine this is a you and Chris conversation, but I mean, at E-rate versus the bond initiative and the timing of these types of things, is there any overlap there that we need to be thinking about as far as our digital footprint or infrastructure?
It just depends on the timeline of when we break ground.
And, right.
I mean, I think the wiring would be a legitimate expense to put, you know, bond I think of as a 30-year expense. I mean, physical plant issues.
Yeah.
It's not that you can't put some of this into bond. Right. It's just.
Might as well use E-rate for what it's there for.
Exactly.
Okay.
So.
It's definitely a shorter life cycle thing.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, it used to be you could get 10 years out of something. Now, typically, it's 3 to 5 if you're lucky, and you're probably triaging at 5 pretty badly.
Yeah.
To give you an idea, for instance, the wireless gear. The current gear that we have is Gen 5. The current generation is Gen 6. Gen 7 is around the corner. We would be buying Gen 6 equipment, and that is, in some ways, a substantial upgrade over, you know, every succeeding generation is new spectrum, more stability, can handle more devices on a single access point. You know, certainly plays into, you know, how and when we can do things like testing 300 kids at once.
Right, yeah.
So, any other questions?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
All right, the next two items are policy review. These are things that we've looked at a couple of times recently. Bringing back KK, which is also up for approval this evening because of Brandy's question last month about attorneys. I think you saw Cindy Ormsby's response, and just wanted to check in and see if that was sufficient for those purposes. Great. And then we'll move on to the transgender policy. And we, as it is revised in front of you and up for approval this evening on the second to last page, about room assignments. No student will be placed in a room assignment against their will or contrary to a parent guardian objection. Any comments, questions, concerns about that?
still see some inherent contradictions potentially that could arise from that, but I assume that the policy also puts into place at least a guideline for administrators to make decisions in the best interest in that particular situation. Fair enough or no?
I think we're gonna have to evolve with this policy.
What?
I think that we're gonna have to evolve as the policy evolves.
I think that's correct, and every situation is unique. So basically, what she has told me, even in the last instance that we've already dealt with, is you want to work with the families, right? And then if the family's wish is that they room in a room, and then any of those kids have an issue, those kids would be afforded the opportunity to. So it's a very fluid situation that will be unique based on the students that are involved.
Okay.
All right, we'll be approving that this evening as well, so just wanted to bring that up. Mr. Estrada, you are up.
Good evening. Hi guys, so I'm here to provide some updated information on enrollment and demographics. I was last here in October, and so since then we've had two big account dates. We had a December account date which gives us updated special education numbers, and our January account date gave us updated numbers on our free and reduced lunch. So I wanted to get you up to speed on all those. So what I typically do is just add to the presentation I had in October. So the first slide, it just shows you that we still have a lot of kids. That hasn't changed. What's really always remarkable, even though I looked at this stuff a million times, is that the fact that our overall enrollment K-12 has increased 48% since 2005, which is just stunning. And in the preschool, that's not in it. We have increased 350% because we had such a small preschool in 05-06, only 44 kids. So those numbers are still out there. Well, that's why we're doing well. Next slide talks a little bit about just a grade level analysis, which shows the 14th year in a row of steady enrollment increase after a 12-year slide. So those numbers continue to climb at a nice steady clip. I would anticipate that the percentage of change will eventually level out a bit. But we did add a plus 55 students from last year. And that really, the biggest jump really comes from graduating about 75 seniors and adding 136 kindergartners this year. What was really surprising about the kindergarten cohort is that we typically will have about 80 kids matriculate from the preschool and add about 40, but this year we had 83 kids move over from preschool. But predicted, but we added a bunch more, 53 plus new kindergartners came. And we're not losing many kids in our cohort. So if you look at, we're a suburban urban district, a -8 in the remaining grades, that's not much change, So, and then the preschool enrollment analysis, we're at a good solid 200 kids in that program. So at any point in time at that building, there are either 475 kids in the afternoon and about 510 kids in the morning. So they have the most. They won the award, Ms. Cobb. But looking at some new data, so historical data on race and ethnicity, and there are some changes here, guys. It is. So I look at kind of a 20-year trend. There's a lot of data archived at DESE. So for 64% of our students are Caucasian, or identify as white. That's probably the largest number we've had since 1990. We still have about 35% students who identify as students of color. Back in 2010-11, DESE increased some of the identification categories. They added multiracial, for example, which did change some of the numbers. But there are some changes in our race and ethnicity and in our makeup. Still a diverse community, but perhaps a little bit less so than we have in the past. Or different types of diversity, I should say. So those are some of the trends. The count is based on October membership, which still hasn't been posted to DESE's website, but we feel pretty confident those are the accurate numbers. Looking at free and reduced lunch, those are we're declining. We were at a 54.5% 20 years ago. We're at 32.74%. Actually, even a 4% decline from last year, which was a little bit surprising to me.
Which will impact all of our federal programs.
Yes, it will. And one of the numbers that our retired colleague Nelson Mitten always asked was the raw numbers, and those have also changed. Last year I was able to say we had about 500 students in the free and reduced lunch group, which is, as a group, kind of a steady number, but as a percentage was smaller. But this year, actually, we're down to 472. So again, our demographics are changing in this community. We'll do a bit of a deep dive and look at some expired apps if there's a few kids that might qualify, but it's not going to significantly change that number, I don't think. I did include some information about the buildings, a lot of consistency, elementary, middle school, high school in the 34 to 33%. Our lowest percentage is at the ECC. Any questions about that? Okay. EL learners, we've, we had only 12 students in the EL program in 11-12 and we had 40. So we tripled the size of that program, but not only in terms of the number of kids that we serve, these are the students that were receiving services. There's an additional 15 to 20 students that we monitor. It's a pretty robust program now. And also the number of minutes per student has increased, it's doubled, because we're having a lot of first-year English language learners. So not only are we serving more kids, we're serving them for more minutes. But they've done some cool things at the high school. Crystal Svoboda, who's I think in her fourth year here, third or fourth year, is doing a lot more push, and what she recognized, even with the first and second year EL learners, is that they needed more support in the gen ed classes. So she's kind of revamped her program. Instead of pulling them out and trying to teach them math and science and social studies English, she's actually pushing into the classes and is doing a really terrific job. We have 2 excellent EL teachers in this district currently. Students with IEPs, Ben alluded to this. Those numbers are also increasing a bit. In 2015-16, we were below the state average and way below the St. Louis County average. We're at 14.34% currently, based on a December count. That's the highest percentage since 2010-11. So we kind of, Ben and I kind of met, we wanted to make sure our numbers were the same. So we're talking on the same night, we should have the same numbers. They're pretty close. But we also wanted to kind of learn more about that. And, it's not really, I think a lot of families that have students with disabilities are looking at MRH because they're really pleased with our services, but it's not I looked at our enrollment, our transfers from 2012-19, about 14% of those students have IEP, so it's not a huge number. It's a little bit higher, but it's consistent with our current rate. As I mentioned, there's been 48% increase in district enrollment, but a 60% increase in special education referrals. What I would say anecdotally is I've seen a higher degree of parent advocacy for their students, which is a good thing, but more requests for special education evaluations, certainly more requests for 504 plans, which are reasonable, and we should provide those. But we have seen increases in those kinds of support plans for students. Ben mentioned that we're over the statewide average, first time in a while, still pretty close, but there is an increase in the statewide average of 0.16, which may not sound like much, but to move any statewide average ever is hard to do, so that is an increase. And also in St. Louis County, we're still below the St. Louis County average, but they've also increased even from last year to 0.3. Again, it's hard to move those big pools of students by percentage. So those are some of our special education trends. But we have had an increase in evaluation requests and students qualifying for services. And that's it. I try to keep it brief because I noticed you guys had a lot of things.
Always good.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, really appreciate
Is there anything else you want me to dig into and learn more about? Can't channel your inner Nelson Mitten for a follow-up question? All right, guys.
Thank you, Ben.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Mr. Rich.
Good evening, I'm Ed Rich. I'm the Director of Communications. I'm also the chairperson of the Calendar Committee. That's why I'm here tonight, to brief you on recent and upcoming activity by that committee, which met yesterday afternoon for the first time. Now, normally the objective of that first meeting is to get cracking in detail on the calendar for 2 years hence. So as you know, since you approved it, the calendar for 2021 is already in the books, subject to change. But so now we're getting down to, and dirty on the one for the next year. However, yesterday's meeting agenda was dominated by a different topic altogether, but it was one that we needed to tackle. It was an issue that arose in a completely separate committee called the Compensation Benefits Task Force, and their question to us was, can you please prepare a snow day plan that would let everyone know well in advance what the order of makeup days is to be? So we got to work. First thing we agreed on was that there's really no set formula or pattern or method that would apply to every year. Each year is unique, federal holidays, the major federal holidays fall on different days of the week. So we scrapped the idea of that and decided that what we'll do is we'll take the calendar guidelines, which is a specific document that kind of frames the decisions that we make, and we will revise that to state that the committee, at its first meeting following the winter break in the second semester, will identify which days and which methods will be employed to identify the makeup dates. And I use the word methods because of that new-ish rule which allows us to count attendance time in hours and minutes instead of days, which creates options for us. So here's a quick synopsis of what we decided yesterday, just to help you understand what our goal is. For that 21-22 academic year, the first and second inclement weather days are already taken care of. That's why we scheduled 2 more days than required by law, so no problem there. For the next 2 inclement weather days, we'll make those up for students by adding additional minutes to days when students would normally attend for only a part of a day. The next snow makeup day would be Friday, June the 4th. After that, we would convert an April professional development day to an attendance day. And if we need yet another one, God forbid, we would eliminate a teacher comp day in May. For teachers, the makeup days would be built in between June 7th and 10th. So I'm not giving you all these specific dates to make you memorize them tonight or expect you to remember them, but just to show you the kind of specificity that we're trying to provide people. I mean, the calendar will somehow be restructured to reflect this, and there will be as frequent as necessary communication from my office to families and staff, letting them know what our plan is. And the idea, again, is to let them know with as much advance notice as possible what the expected makeup dates would be. So next up for the calendar committee in early March, we'll say, mid-March, more likely, we'll be just getting down to the nitty-gritty of the 21-22 calendar, which I can predict with some degree of certainty will look pretty much like the one for 2021, in that we'll have a semester that ends, a first semester that ends after the winter break, and a second semester that won't end until the first week of June. But we all know why that's happening. So, any questions?
Did one of our neighbors just decide to extend their school day to get in?
Not yet. Are you talking about Webster Groves?
To get in the semester before winter break.
They are surveying, if it's Webster Groves you're talking about, they're surveying their families right now. They say that by adding 20 minutes a day, they can create 5 extra days over a period of 3 weeks. But that's a major change, operational change for one thing. So
it is an option. We talked to the calendar committee yesterday that comes at a trade-off, because while you get minutes that make it okay with DESE, that doesn't necessarily translate well into student learning episodes. So you're probably giving up a week of instruction, or getting minutes incrementally is not the same as a full class period, so that's a trade-off. The other factor that we have here that we talked about with CBTF is you currently contract teachers by contract days. So when we start incrementally adding minutes, that changes our staffing structure a bit. So we're either asking teachers to work longer during the contract day, or we're having to come up with some formula about how many minutes equal the contract day time, and it creates problems with our staffing structure. And as Wes knows, a teacher's staffing day is a lot of money. So we want to be fiscally responsible and make fair to our staff, but also fiscally responsible in terms of how we're using those days.
Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chris Holzer.
Okay. Okay, I need to be able to see this too. Hang on, let me switch this around. Okay, there we go. Okay, good evening. The items of interest, as usual, do a good job of hitting the high points on what is happening within our finances for the past, well, year to date, from the beginning of the fiscal year through January. Our revenues are tracking just as we would expect expect just slightly higher than they have been in prior years. Specifically last year, 2%, and the year before, 5% on the local revenue side. State revenues are significantly higher. That's primarily due, as stated in the items of interest, of the formula payment coming in the wrong year. Federal is right about where we had budgeted it to be and slightly higher than in the previous year. Debt service tracking right along with the operating budgets. And nothing happening in the bond issue funds yet. So operating funds, again, 86% of our funds are locally provided through our property taxes and other such things. And I know these are very small. This is for the benefit of our viewers at home. But our instructional expenditures are tracking slightly behind where they were last year, but right on track as our instructional support. Community services right as well, and total expenses in general are slightly less than they have been in prior years. Going a little bit deeper, our salaries and benefits are tracking right along as they should, as are purchase services and supplies. Slightly lower, but that's more than likely due to timing of payments and things like that. Capital outlay, right there at 50%, as we are 50% through the year. That seems appropriate to me. 11% on debt service funds, and be blocking my total expenditures down here. Thank you. 43.4% compared to 49.5% as from last year. So again, expenses are good. And moving on to everyone's favorite page. I need to look at yours, Roxanne. Too small. Our fund balance is currently sitting at 40.5. This is a budgeted fund balance now. So needless to say, the district finances are quite healthy at this point in time.
Any questions there?
Heck no.
All right, let's keep it moving.
Yes, ma'am. Which one was next?
Budget overview.
Okay. Okay, here we go. As promised, as part of our budgeting calendar, we will get a first look at the revenue anticipated or projected for the following year. I will tell you that this is simply a projection. Our figures are very rough at this point. First of all, since we're entering an off assessment year, our new construction improvements and personal property increases will be the only growth we see on this next fiscal year. Given the trends in specifically residential growth in the area, we're anticipating about a $3 million increase to assessed valuation due to those types of developments, in conjunction with any of the commercial developments that have also come on the books since then. So that would be a projected increase in total of $125,000 to the budget, with $87,000 to operations and the balance of that to debt service. Sales tax revenue, we're projecting about a $64,000 or 2.4% increase over this year, and that's based on the DESI projection of $1,036 per student. On the basic formula payments, again, weighted ADA, which you heard Josh speak about with the summer school program, to be about $16.48 per student, or it's not per student, per weighted average daily attendance, at 1,390 students, which is an increase of 51, projected monetary increase of $181,000. So local revenue, a 0.5% increase, slight decline in county revenue, a significant increase in state revenue, and I'll explain that a little bit more as we get into some of my other presentations here in a bit. That's a bit higher than what we've seen in prior years. And federal revenue, as we've already discussed, due to our declining free and reduced lunch rate, we will likely experience a slight decline on federal revenues. And as our friends from Riverview and Normandy matriculate out, losing the revenue that was coming from that. So all in all, about a 1% increase. So source. Just another illustration of the importance of our local taxpayers and community members to the funding and operation of the school district, and how little the other contributions from our other sources are. Just a preliminary look at staffing. Roxanne alluded to this earlier. She will get into more in-depth. I won't read all of these to you, but these are all positions, primarily support positions, with the exception of PE, which, due to our increased enrollment and the conversations we've had around 4 gym classes in our gym at one time, we also need to add a half FTE to take care of some of that, and replacing some positions that we've left open for this year. Yep. Subject to change.
Even as we speak.
Even as we speak. So again, our next steps we are deep in budget preparation right now on the expense side. We've had all but 3 of our meetings, and I will get you a first look at the expense budgets in March. And of course, as we get more accurate information from the county and the state.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very well.
Fee-based programs.
Okay, this one's a little bit longer, but I'm going to cruise through this one too. You can feel the wind in my hair as we speak. So what is a preschool presentation without some pictures of some preschool kids? Especially that little guy in the yellow with his thumbs up. Okay, so these are the numbers as they stand. Again, these tend to move around slightly as kids move in. As they turn 3, they're now eligible, they can join the programming. So right now we're sitting at about 203 students. I say about because this number does move around a little bit. So overall, you can see that the enrollment is slightly higher than it was last year, but slightly lower than the year prior to that. Again, this is just due to the dynamics of which kids are attending which portions of our program and at what point they enter the program as a result of their age. Excuse me. So this is the rates. Last year, you all voted to increase the tuition rate for preschool and to leave that consistent for 2 straight years. This is year 1 of that. Thus, next year will remain with these very same rates. And you can see here that the free and reduced lunch status is 50% of the full tuition rate on all aspects. Which I should say is a change from prior years where it was just on the free side. Okay, so here is our fiscal analysis. So last year this time we were looking at a slight cost to the district or loss. This year we're looking at a slight plus on the revenue side. However, we do project that this should land right around that 0 mark as anticipated. Okay, so here's where things get a little bit more complicated. So I have to slow down here just a bit. In 2016, the state gave us the option to claim at least a portion of our preschool students in our formula calculations for state aid. So at the time, it was only available to students that are to school districts that did not meet the accreditation. And since those school districts have declined and more funds have become available, they've opened this opportunity up to the rest of the school districts in the state. So we've been analyzing this for a few years to see if it was something that would be a good option for us. It appears that we are at that point where this may, in fact, be a good option for us. It could potentially solve some problems related to access, which is more exciting to me than the other things. So there's a lot of rules, though, and here they are in front of you. They have to be a resident, so this is no problem. We don't accept currently non-resident students except for staff. They must qualify for free and reduced lunch. We cannot charge them tuition. Talk about that in a second. Oh, they also can't receive state-assisted childcare. But if we're not charging them tuition, that doesn't matter. So cannot receive instruction in early childhood special ed. This is a nuance. There are some rules around this where we can potentially do this, but they cannot be in a self-contained early childhood special ed classroom where it's an early childhood special ed teacher solely there.
We can do our co-taught classroom, but we
adding some bureaucracy to our lives, but you'll see in the end why I think this could potentially benefit our students. Once the pupil is designated, we can't be switching them around. Okay, so we designate these students, those are the ones that we accept and submit. If the student moves out of the district, they can be replaced, but we can't say this month it's this child and this month it's this child. It must be 3 by the time, so it's the same sort of rules for kindergarten, it's just down 2 years for preschool. They must be certified teachers, which for us isn't a problem because we only hire certified preschool teachers. And all of the revenue streams may not exceed the total cost of instruction. This is important because we can also use Head Start. So we can blend our funding. It's not graded funding, it's blended funding, so such that as long as the total funds received on behalf of that child do not exceed what it costs to teach that child, we can use those funding sources. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So, here's more rules. So I put the grass in there to sort of brighten things up a little bit. We can only claim 4% of our K-12 free and reduced lunch population. So that means there's only a very small number quantitatively of students that we can claim on the preschool side. That's okay. 13 students would result in an increase of approximately $80,000. Losing 13 preschool pupils tuition payments, because we can't charge them, remember, would be a decrease of $44,000. Losing all state aid is another $15,000 decrease, which would be a net increase of $21,000.
How much of a paperwork headache is
Yeah.
I've had him check that, and I've had him check 4 times whether or not this somehow gets conflated with our federal programs paperwork, because that would be untenable, but he has assured me that that will not be happening.
It doesn't. As long as it doesn't exceed the total cost of instruction for that child, we're good. We are still looking into this. We actually spoke with Rachel about this today, and honestly, the increase of paperwork isn't really all that much because we're doing it anyway. We're just now going to submit it. Here's the interesting thing. We are only able to offer this free tuition to our 5 full-day students. Because along with all the rest of these rules, they have to meet the minutes of instruction rules as well.
Right.
And that's the only aspect of our preschool program that currently meets those. Now we could do percentages of the 3 full-day kids as part FTEs, but that would exceed our number of students that are eligible. So at this point, when we do this, this would allow us to offer free tuition for our 5-day full-time preschool students.
Which will also help us with some of the literacy figures you were saying earlier, because it will help us with the early access, which is very much on my mind.
So we are not 100% sure on this yet. This is likely a proposal I'll bring back to you in the next month or so, fully, but I wanted to at least put this in front of you. We spent a lot of time on this,
Yeah.
and it
Appreciate the
So I get excited too early.
It's a heavy meeting, but it's all
Dang.
important stuff.
when we first saw these numbers, I mean, my initial reaction was, you mean we can offer this cadre of students free tuition and it still benefit all parties?
Right.
And if that answer is yes, that's when I start to get excited.
Yeah.
So right now it looks like that answer is potentially yes.
So we appreciate the teas, but
That's awesome.
make us
Right,
happy.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But thank you for just the
Thanks,
work,
man.
just
You're
the.
Wow.
I'll take that little bit of excitement. That's awesome.
Yes.
Do we think that the reason that some families are opting into the 3-day or 2-day options is because of the cost? Like it's prohibitive to them to enroll in 5 days?
It's a really good question.
Okay.
And I don't know that we can, Cindy may have a better sense of that. She really has her finger on the pulse of it.
Personally, yes.
Well, and because you have 2.
Yes. Yeah. So I mean, I can't speak for
Sure.
everyone, right? But like, yes. especially when you have two at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know they don't do BOGO for.
Or not even a
unfortunately.
sibling discount.
Right,
So
right.
yeah, which hey, I'm not complaining. Okay, I'm just gonna put that out there. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I mean, at the last PAC, the last PAC play date, I mean, I had a conversation with someone who was like, you know, my child's in the, you know, the 4-year-old room right now, but the younger sibling we can't afford to put in yet. Maybe when the older kid is in kindergarten, you know, we can put him in. So
one other dynamic that is absolutely there, and this is really just across the region, not just specific to MRH, but I know a lot of folks just aren't ready to give their child up for 5 full days at 3 or 4 years old yet.
We are.
Amen.
My twins can go.
So I think that it's also one of the things we're going to have to watch very carefully is that number of students that are eligible. It may be that we at some point institute a sliding scale, which we already have. So the folks that we're helping right now, we may be able to continue to help in this way rather than the other way that we have been with the MRH tuition assistance program that we have. So we're watching all these moving dynamics, but I'll have more for you next month.
Question.
Yes, ma'am.
I realize I'm probably putting the cart before the horse, but any consideration into how those families will be selected?
Well, right now, the numbers work out such that it's all of them.
But with the assumption that, like with Katie's statement about how many don't utilize it because they can't afford to.
So right now, the number of free and reduced lunch students, I guess what I'm telling you is the number of free and reduced lunch students that we currently have in our preschool is currently within the 4% threshold.
Okay, so that's whether they're
The number of kids that would be eligible.
In that 5-day program.
Right, no, I'm saying, what about the number? Oh, okay, so I see what you're saying. They
There's
would,
a lot of
they wouldn't
layers
be
to
in the 3 to 4 day program anyway.
Right.
Okay.
It's sort of the program sort of selects out, and the number is really, really low anyway. On free and reduced lunch students in the preschool as a whole.
Okay.
But if it gets to the point to where we do have to start making those choices, that's when the sliding scale would come into play, where we would have to make some sort of I guess a determination on that based on income, which is what we already do for our sliding scale for MRH tuition assistance. So.
Okay, thank you.
all right, you want to keep going with
Yeah, because I have 2 more programs. So here's our Discover Club program. We currently have 134 kids in the ECC, but we're only licensed for 130. Well, that works out because this is in total AM, PM, so it's 130 kids concurrent. So this works out fine, no problems. Current wait list is 6.
That's it.
Yay.
Likely because most of those folks just made other arrangements.
Yeah, right.
Here are our Discover Club rates. We raised those along with preschool tuition rates last year. We did that for another 2-year cycle, so next year we're good. Here's our balance sheet, as it were. At this point, the revenue generated from Discover Club currently is $78,000 through January.
Would it be helpful to raise the Discover Club salaries to, I know we get a lot of turnover in those positions.
We do, and I'll tell you, potentially, but a bigger determining factor is the requirements for accreditation, which is college credit. You have to have that college credit course in there related to early childhood education or childhood
You have to
education.
have several hours plus a course related to early childhood. So when people are getting that, typically the people that we get that want to work Discover Club because of the limited hours are usually students.
Yeah.
And so the reason we have turnover is when they finish their degree,
Yeah.
they're gonna be a preschool teacher or they're gonna be a teacher. So, our wages are relatively competitive compared to what other people are paying, but it's the college hour requirement that continues to cause us.
We have an alum working for us right now. She has for years. She's fantastic, but she's student teaching right now, so we're about to lose her, and it's hard because she's one of our best. But yet she's moving on to start her career as an educator, so who can fault that?
Right.
All right, onward and forward. If there are no other questions. Okay, so I'm super super excited about the food service program, but in the interest of time, I'm going to go through this, but I don't want to discount the work that Irene, Juan, our food services manager, and Chef Chris have been doing, because it's fantastic. Irene is under my supervision, and one of the things that I saw, I wanted to put some shape around the program and what the program goals were. So the best way to do that is to set forth a plan of some sort. We thought of it in terms of a roadmap. So what is our roadmap for the next 3 years? That felt like a reasonable length of time to do some planning. So last spring we sat down, we locked ourselves in Roxanne's little conference room, and we spent the whole day in there. We got lunch, and we spent more time in there, and we came up with this. Phase 1, which is we're currently in, to implement meal viewer. You may, if you've walked around the high school, seen this big display outside the high school that has some high school pictures that Kevin's put up there, but it also has menus for that day, as well as nutritional information, including allergy alerts. They spent the summer inputting all of our meal data into this system so that could happen. The coolest thing about this is there's a phone app, and it's also on our websites. Now parents can go see exactly what the caloric values plus the other nutritional data associated with the meals that the children are being served, including allergens, which is super, super important. So we did that, digital signage, website, mobile app, social media campaign, website update. That's pending, that's coming this spring. Irene's already started working with Ed, but they're going to, in earnest, make some significant changes to the website to make sure that that page on our website is an accurate representation of what's happening programmatically throughout the district for that program. Then we started this training plan. So we have a certified sous chef that we've hired, and Chef Chris. He's fantastic. We have another chef, Chef Nelson. He's a pastry chef. These guys know some stuff. So there's no sense in them knowing stuff and the rest of them knowing not so much stuff. Yeah. So they have engaged this training plan. So on PD days, we've added those days to their work calendars. They are now engaged in, if not active shooter and social emotional type training that we're offering them. They are working on knife cuts and those types of things. Because, along with the observations and the coaching and the post-fall, all the things that go along with training as you would expect. Because next year, we're going to continue that to another level, develop new menu items, and start in earnest developing more scratch cooking. We couldn't do any of that until we raised the skill level of the entire department. Yep. Then looking at phase 3, making a conscious shift to that scratch cooking and developing a flagship meal, if you will, that will be from scratch at each building, which is ambitious. One scratch meal is ambitious. That's how difficult that is. But that is what we set forth to do years and years ago, and we're engaging in that vision and making sure that that happens very soon. So this spring, Chris and Irene, probably before that, are going to sit down and do a temperature test on where we're at and revise this plan for the coming year. As you do with multi-year plans, you have to revise them every year, otherwise they don't necessarily happen the way intended. So, having said all that, this is part of what that training allows us to do. Sam Smith, Dr. Smith, worked with our high school student equity team, and they created the Cultures of MRH project, which is for each month, January through May, developing a menu, a full meal representative of each of these areas of our world. So January was Greece. My kids absolutely loved it. It was some chicken, all kinds of Greece type meal that you would find in Greece. February is Peru. And let's see, Peru and March, that's where we're at right now. That's the menu that I put in front of you there. That's the menu from March. And this one, Dr. Smith was engaged in making sure that this was an accurate representation, and the kids loved this one as well. One of our bigger days. April, soul food, Americana, and then May is Serbia. So this happened, and I couldn't believe it. This is exactly the type of thing that we're looking to happen in our food service department, and it's what we can do when we get really good people and get them in the right places and give them the proper resources. So exciting. This is just a picture of what that display looks like. We have 3. We have one in the middle school, we have one in the high school, and we have one in the cafeteria. This is a representation of what the mobile app looks like, as well as what a parent or student can see on the district website if they follow the little links for the school menus. Now here's how things are trending as far as the meals we serve. No sense putting the numbers up here. The height of the bars tells you everything. So top is ECC breakfast. You can see that the number of free and reduced lunch eligible students are declining over the past 3 years, while with some strange anomaly that's happened this year, we're not quite sure what's going on right there. We're trying to figure that out. But at the ECC, at least, those number of paid students have increased from the prior year. And you can see just from the shape of the graphs that the number of paid students that are eating breakfast is increasing and the number of free students is decreasing. That's trending right along with the change in the overall free and reduced lunch rates. So through January, we've served just under 40,000 breakfasts, which is sort of mind-boggling when you think about it. It's a lot of food. These are the lunch numbers and trends. And Irene said that the middle schoolers are eating her out of house. They eat a lot of food.
Mine are probably contributing to that.
Mine too. Slightly under 49,000 meals on the, so if we back up just a bit. So just pretty close on those numbers there. It's interesting how quick these numbers build up. And together, 145.4 thousand meals served through January. Okay, so this is another interesting dynamic that we're starting to really pay attention to this year. Past years, we've had significant conversations in this space about lunch debt and what the effect of that is. So we've started digging into that a little bit. So here's account. That means prepaid. So if you send a check or cash with your kid to school, they give that to the cashier or to the secretary. They put that on the child's account. The My School Bucks program, which they can put deposit funds online, that's also part of this. So that's what the blue lines are. On account. Cash or check, this is cash at the register, cash in hand. Hardly happens. It happens, but in proportion to everything else, it's hardly worth mentioning. This is the one where the debt comes in. The charge. Charge doesn't mean charge card. It means charged to the student's account in the negative, meaning they have no funds in their account, they have no cash in hand. We give them a lunch, which is absolutely appropriate as far as I'm concerned. And that's a decision that the board's made as well. The good thing is that the number of students that have done that this year is significantly less than it was last year at the same time. So we've taken some active steps. We are communicating with families. We do have some significantly high balances. From time to time, we do get donations, and Irene selects through Vince, collaboration with Vince, selects the families that they've identified to be of great need. Irene will send them a letter and said, an anonymous donor has forgiven or has donated, and this amount of your lunch balance has been forgiven, which is fantastic.
May I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
Like how would someone in the community know that they can donate funds to the school district for lunch debt like that?
It's a good question. I think you and I actually started talking about, no, Irene and I in our meeting this morning started talking about that very thing. Trying to get our heads around what that looks like to make, there's a number of options that we discussed. Don't want to get too far in front of myself on those, but we're talking about that.
Okay.
And I think that our website is a perfect place to do that. There's some other donation programs I think that we can probably offer up.
Just add another tab, add another donation tab.
I would think that, as just speaking for myself and the board and our commitment to making sure that all kids get fed,
yes,
regardless, and given there's been some horrifically bad, high-profile news stories about other districts that do things differently, I mean, I would the board would be, I would think we would be very much in favor of being more communicative about that opportunity and maybe even adding that to something that we think about from a fundraising standpoint in addition to our scholarship.
See, that's what I'm saying. So I'm sorry to give you guys some background. I was talking to Chris about how we could have some type of link that would, so that community members could go to on our website to donate to the Nelson Mitten Scholarship. And so when I was just like, can we add another donation tab, it would be for lunches. So, but yeah, I agree with everything that Francis just said.
It's easy. One thing that I always have to mention, because I'm the money guy, is the more opportunity you give to donate, the more diffuse the donations become across the whole of the donations you're asking for. I think it's a wonderful idea. We just have to be aware that that dynamic is out there, and if we do that, we could see a decline in some of the others. Which
I believe in our community. I'm just going to put that out there.
I get the sense that that folks have, heard about other efforts happening in other communities, and it moves them to just do this sort of
yes,
right?
Yes.
So I was approached by a anonymous donor, and Karen and I worked together, and I got these numbers, and when I provided it back to that potential donor, they also got it from another school district, and the number was much lower, so their donation could wipe out the entire debt for that school district, where our number was higher, and it couldn't have a big enough impact for them. So just be mindful of that, and that's up to us to manage. But
I think a couple folks have asked for that number, and it's significant, which is excellent.
Actually, so it even surprised me.
So unpaid meal balances to this point in time are $29.7 million. So that's a big number. Here's the difficulty in that number. A lot of that is old debt. So we haven't, because of our switch in the systems over the past years, we haven't been able to get a good look. So the end of January is our benchmark for right now. We're going to measure this again at the end of the school year. We'll measure it again at the end of next January. So we'll have benchmarks so we can monitor the growth or decline of this debt over time. I will tell you that we have some really large balances, and unfortunately the way the system is put together, in order to qualify, you have to be, for free lunch, you have to be 130% of the poverty rate, which moves around all over the place, and that's just a really low number.
And it's really extremely low, yes.
So just because they don't qualify for free and reduced lunch doesn't mean that there's not need there. And they're sitting on that financial bubble where they still struggle, but they don't qualify for the services that they probably really need. Yeah. So, that being said,
I think related to just district donations too, I might like to see some sort of overlay with this and the WOW program as well. I mean, I do worry that if we start pushing lunch debt, it could potentially eat into the WOW program, and it would be interesting to see if there is some relationship to families that have debt and maybe recipients of WOW support as well.
that's a good suggestion, and
if it's possible, it may not be in the data that we keep. So
we'll see. I know Vince is engaged with the WOW program as Kat, so I think that if nothing else, we can have some dialogue around that. Here's what I find interesting. I don't know that it's anything but interesting, but the number of paid students, that debt is represented by more paid students than it is reduced students. And most interesting is the free students. So Vince was talking about expired applications. If those free students were to turn in those applications, they leave this list and their debt goes away.
Yeah.
Because then they're eligible federally for the free and reduced lunch program. So there's often multiple reasons why they choose to do that, but it's not for lack of effort. We really try and do this. The number of paid students, I think, is illustrative of where that poverty line threshold is. So on the surface, it looks like, well, we just have a whole lot of kids that can afford it that aren't paying. I don't think that's what's happening.
Right.
I don't have a way to quantify that fully, but that's just my.
And are we still doing outreach through like the superintendent's office or, you know, somebody internally who's making calls to remind families that they're actually carrying a debt?
A member of my team
Yeah.
weekly sends calls, emails, and a lot of times the response she gets, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
Right.
We set up an ACH.
Yeah.
She talks to them about if you put this much in per month, plus the meals that your child eats per month, this is what it's gotta be.
Yeah.
To start reducing the debt.
Yeah.
It's not all that unlike credit card debt.
Right.
You have to make greater than the minimum payment in order to make a dent in that debt. So, she works with folks. Sadly, the majority of the folks we never hear from.
That's what we thought.
Yeah. So, on to the next slide. So we are operating at a net loss at this point in time. That was not unexpected. It is greater than it was last year at this point in time, but that makes sense because we're serving more food to more students.
All right. We got one more presentation, Chris.
Oh yes, this is where I get really excited. It's like halftime. It's like a halftime show.
At 10:09.
Please say it's not halftime. Let's say we're entering the fourth quarter.
Okay, you all know that I love budgeting.
Yes.
It was difficult for me to decide which program evaluation to do because I initially chose purchasing, which is another thing that I really like. But because my professional roles over the past few years are closely related to quality improvement, continuous quality improvement, and process creation and implementation, it seemed that I should start at the budgeting spot because you can't spend it until you budget. So with that, here we go. So our budget is governed by rules, regulations, and policies. We have board policies. We have state statutes. We have DESI guidelines. We have federal regulations. All of those things together mean that we've got a lot of rules that we have to ensure that we're following to meet everyone's guidelines. So here's what our budgeting process looks like. 30,000-foot view. This is kind of small. I'm hoping you can see it better on your screens. First, we have to prepare and project, followed by request and review. We compile all that data, we present it, then you adopt it, and the principals engage it. So from start to finish, all this is planning leading up to you all adopting the budget for the year and then us engaging. That's where the purchasing comes in, is engaging the budget. Make sure I have everything. So here's how this worked a couple years ago. Budget administrators created their budgets, each in their own format. Imagine how that was to be me, Roxana, Karen, everyone bringing their own kind of thing. We got it done, but it wasn't awesome. The account totals were aggregated in a spreadsheet and we imported them into Ally. There's nothing wrong with that. Just not real efficient.
Yeah.
And there was little support or guidance from the business office.
That's where you inherited.
I inherited that.
And a lot of scrutiny from the board.
Yes.
Which is
on
why.
all of the spreadsheets.
So the following year, we started using Budget Manager. We entered the budget line items with descriptions into Ally. We actually have a system inside of our accounting system that does budgeting. It works. It's actually pretty good. They don't like it a lot, but it works pretty well. We provided support. We flipped the learning. I'm a teacher after all, so I recorded instructional videos, put them on my YouTube channel from school, and made those available to everybody. So in their own time, I can't get to everybody. There's only one of me. There's a whole bunch of them. This worked. Vince loves my videos, so he's still here. Daytime Emmy Award-winning videos. I also provided individual and group workshops. Not all of them took me up on those, but a number of them did. And sometimes it was as much as, it was just a phone call. Sometimes we sat down in a room together for a couple hours and just knocked through it. All right, for this past year, this is weird because I'm working in 3 years at the same time. So fiscal 20, the current year, but it was last spring that we were doing all this work. They continued using Budget Manager, but they started also, I created this big 97-page budget planning document, which is really big and scary, but that's because it contains data for every department. I did that for a reason because I feel like it's important for the sake of transparency. Everybody understands what everybody else is doing and accountable for. Whether they choose to use it, that's not up to me, but it's available to them as a resource if they choose to use it. It also steps them through step by step the process, gives them all account changes, all of those nuts and bolts types of things that they have to be aware of, but they don't live this every day, so they may not be aware of. So I help them with that. Then we also ask them to start providing not just the line item description, but also the justification, the why. Not just the what, but the why. That's important. In another slide, I'll explain why. But this adds an additional layer of scrutiny, not only from us as administrators as reviewing the budget, but them as practitioners entering the budget. When they have to type the why, it makes them think a little deeper about the what. And then I built all these reports so that we could pull all that out, so they could use that as a resource for purchasing for that actual fiscal year. So it wasn't just a one-time and done, because I knew I couldn't sell them on that. They had to be able to use this thing that I asked them to do, which they did. And they did really well at it. So now they have a purchasing guide to guide their purchasing throughout the school year. Again, I re-recorded all the videos, and we did person-to-person workshops, and did a purchasing training to all the administrative assistants. This was super critical because while the budget administrators may put these budgets together, it's their assistants that actually do the purchasing. So there was a bit of a disconnect between the principal and their support staff and actually getting the budget actualized. This sort of started bringing those things together, created a space for them to have dialogue around what their purchasing timeline was. So we had a way to put dates to when these things needed to happen, which also made the business office life a little bit less frantic and hectic and random seeming. Everything in emergency mode because someone needs a check. Well, let's plan a little bit and let's make sure that check comes out in time. This is working fantastically well. So, again, we're in the budgeting season now, coming to the end of it. I refined the guide. They did the justification and descriptions again. Built more new reports that are better than the old ones. Re-recorded all the videos and more person-to-person workshops. And built the process. This is what that process looks like. So we can say we have processes all day long, but until I can actually point to something and say this step, then this step, then this step, I don't really feel like it's a process. So now they know what they're held accountable to. I know what I'm held accountable to. And at the end of the day, this starts at the green and ends at the red. And right now, it's stuck on me because I'm the one that's reviewing everything right now. And eventually, I'll send them an email that'll say, this is your budget. If they agree, they'll send it back. That's their budget. Uh-oh, I think I duplicated my slides. Sorry, let's get through this real quick. Oh man, sorry. Okay, click-by-click instructions. That was another ad that we did, just so that there was no confusion. Click on this, then you click on this, then you click on that. And I hope that was helpful. Okay, why all the detail? Provides consistent platform to maintain the budget data and increases accuracy. It gives each stakeholder the opportunity to better understand the dynamics of budget so that one day they may love it as much as I do.
I would hold your breath.
Requiring the justification, there's that accountability piece and transparency. They know what they're held accountable to. We're looking at everything, they're looking at everything. That level of detail is appropriate for them and us. That's not what we share with you all, but you can be assured that because of this work, what you're getting is their best work in our district. So it's not just a one and done. Budget is a living, breathing thing. And now we've done all this detailed work, they can use that to guide their work through the entire rest of the school year. Connections to equity. This is something that is super important. So with all that detail, we're able to, in their budget meetings and others, have a deep understanding of what the financial impact to equity is, because there is some. It costs a little bit more money to do it that way. It's worth every penny, but money doesn't grow on trees. So we have to find ways, okay, this year we did this, now next year we'll do this. Now we have a clear and accurate picture of what those things were, so that we can make sure that we are actually able to use our financial resources ensure that equity is occurring in our schools. So what are we going to do? We're going to keep refining this process. Continuous quality improvement demands that we keep making this better from year to year to year. I start working on this usually in mid to late September is when I really start getting my brain in gear. I've got notes for fiscal 22 already. We'll just make this better next year.
And the consistency with Alio now allows you to maybe do some year-over-year comparisons with the right line items budgeted for the right amounts. And
I was working with one of our people today in my office. We printed out the report of what they budgeted line item with justification for last year.
Yep.
We used that as a guide for what they were going to budget this year. There was things we trimmed, there was things we added, but we had something that we could look at that all of us had access to.
Chris is being a little modest too, because what he didn't say is in the middle of all of this, DESI changed all of his account coding, so they've totally flipped all of the account codes at the same time they were doing all of this systemic work. So kudos to he and his team, because it has not been a small feat.
We do the work that is in front of us, and we just get on going. So
Alio continues to provide value.
every day, in spite of its little
Putting that out
quirks.
there in the public record.
Okay, that's all I have. I didn't put a question slide on here, but if you have any,
How often do you receive updates to the Alio software? I know
Every
the
month.
modules and.
Between 4 to 8 weeks, somewhere around there. And lately, some of the updates have been because I have asked for things, demanded things that needed to work better, and they're responding. They're
Good. Okay.
I don't say that to be mean. They are a very responsive Weidenhammer. They're a very responsive company. We're on the phone with them nearly every day. It's a huge system.
Yeah.
Very intricate. Thousands of programs built into it, and they help make it better for us.
Excellent.
Yep. Okay.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
You're welcome.
All right, moving into board communications. Calendar, Black History Month dinner next week. Hope to see y'all there. Obviously, we have town hall coming up in March. Kat, I didn't see on the board calendar that we see the adjusted board meeting date for March. I'm not sure if that's showing up on the
I just checked
website
that
or not.
and
Okay.
adjusted it, so it
Okay.
should reflect.
Great. Hope you all have the district teacher recognition night, which will be the night after our March board meeting. And the district-wide open house is also coming up the first weekend in April. So, be planning for that. A request that I've had about our calendar for the upcoming school year is the potential of moving our work sessions from the second Tuesday of the month because it conflicts primarily with Maplewood City Council meetings. We've had a few instances, obviously, this year of being double booked. Wondering if administration could look at suggesting a different date. I don't know if and I think we've also gotten into some traps this year too of having the second Tuesday and the third Thursday being within the same week, and that doesn't feel particularly helpful those months when we're double booked in a week for a work session and a board meeting. So wondering about maybe one of the other Thursdays of the month becoming our standing work session meeting, so that we know it's at least not going to be a double work session and board meeting night. But again, I want to just kind of put that out there for consideration, and I know y'all are already planning the particulars of committees and things in 2020, 2021, so putting that out there as well.
Can I make a plug on the calendar?
Sure.
Just on March 12th, Mike Duffy's Pub and Grill in Richmond Heights is going to support the district by having a theme night and part of the benefits will go towards the Nelson Mitten Scholarship. So I'm gonna work with Chris and Ed on just getting that information out into our community, but just wanted to let you all know, March 12th. No, yeah, I made sure.
Okay.
That's it, thank you.
Sure.
March 5th.
As far as board development is concerned, I think we've zeroed in pretty well on a date for the Crossroads training in June. It looks like that second weekend in June was gonna work for the most folks. So we'll spend a little bit of time at our work session in March, fleshing out some of the other invites we'd like to make to that, but I believe that's moving forward. I don't know, Kat, do you have any other relevant data there?
I don't have any additional updates other than that Karen asked me to solidify the time frames as we discussed on that, the 12th, and it's 5 to 8, and the 13th, it's 8 to 4, again on the 14th. So
Great.
she'll get, I think, more information to us soon.
Great, thank you very much. Sorry, anything is not coming up here, so. Safe and Inspirational Spaces Committee, anything to report?
Got a meeting next week.
Great.
Lovely.
CBTF, Wes, lots going on there.
Yeah, quite a bit going on. What it really, the most important, and I think, is that you did roll out the, you guys took the salary on the road tour, and have we gotten the feedback on that yet, or?
It's been almost completely positive. There's been a few questions. We've been working with Dr. Massey. We noticed a trend in some of the feedback that we're getting, and we've done just a little bit of fine tuning to the models that we presented. So we'll bring those to the CBTF
Next week. Okay.
And then if the CBTF decides to move forward with those, then we'll need to go on a quick tour again around the buildings to make sure that all of that is clearly communicated. They are minor changes, but I think they're changes that that address some of the concerns that were brought forth by the teachers, mainly around the salaries being competitive in particular points, particular channels within the schedule.
Great.
So that's that.
Anything else?
Nope.
All right, Wellness Committee, Al.
Yeah, we had our first meeting this year, which was a couple of weeks ago on the 2nd of February, and if you can see kind of our agenda there, that we had meetings and kind of some updates and things, but most of our meeting kind of functioned on the smart snack standards, which we got some explanations from our attorney and everything. So we kind of emphasized, some of the type of things that we can have and can't have, and this cupcake thing we have to be concerned about from time to time. But Vince is going to kind of emphasize this more maybe at some of the faculty meetings, so our principals can be more aware of this. So not to prolong things, but this was kind of the main thing that we emphasized. And I think there with our Elaine mentioned, not Elaine, but that there would be a personnel position, I believe, possibly being filled soon in food service.
I just got the checks today, so it's not on tonight's meeting, but I will have someone that will be hiring forthwith because she just, we just got all the clearances.
Right.
A couple hours, well, it's more than a couple hours now.
Great.
Half a day ago. So other than that, it's pretty good meeting.
Excellent. Joe's Place, our new reps.
Yeah.
Anything to report? You don't have to
So
report.
we had a meeting, and where the transitions happened.
It has to be.
And they elected officers. And we kind of talked about some of our fundraising plans. And that was really it. It was a longer meeting than normal because everybody was there to elect the reps, etc. So, but everything's going pretty well, and we'll be reporting later.
And Julia Schaffner is your new.
Yeah, and March 28th, I think, is the big fundraiser.
Or is it the one with Sam Blue? Sam's gonna be playing.
I'm sorry.
Is that the one where I saw Sam's gonna be playing?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's on the 28th of March. So it's kind of busy week for a lot of us.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the biggest fundraiser going on. So actually, our new president kind of spoke to me as a kind of faith leader. This possibility I'm gonna try to reach out to some of our local churches to get their interest and perhaps maybe somewhat maybe making it a mission to pledge a certain amount if we can to go toward Joe's place. So there's more talk about it. That is something that we feel that can be done. A lot of churches like to have missions, and particularly when it comes to local organizations. Once I believe we share enough information, they'll be willing to make some type of financial contribution from time to time, which will add to help support Joe's place. So, as Brandon mentioned, we got a lot of updates of the budget from last year and everything, and expenditures. So, sounds like some good things are happening with Joe's place right now.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. MSBA report, I'm actually going to kick it to Nikki, who attended the Advocacy Day last week.
So I went to Jefferson City, and we were able to, like all of the school board representatives throughout the state that came, were able to hear from a panel of representatives and learn more about why they believe that Kansas City and St. Louis should have charter schools, although these representatives come from rural areas. And then we were also able to, kind of disperse and go into the Capitol building and meet with our representatives. I met with Scott Sifton and talked with him about some concerns that I had. There's one bill that has been presented, and it came from a representative, and forgive me for not having the bill for you all right now, but basically it seemed like he became upset because some constituents came up to Jeff City and told him how they felt about what he was doing, and they didn't like it, and in return then there was this bill that came out that said, school board members can be removed very easily, and if they violate things like moral turpitude, just things like that, very archaic, then they could be removed. So it's like, people are upset that folks are using their First Amendment right to complain to people that they elected. So, but like I said, I spoke to Scott Sifton, and he was like, okay, no, definitely not going to support anything that. Right, right. Definitely not going to support anything that's going to affect First Amendment rights of citizens throughout the state. And then I tried to visit with Gina Mitten, but she was working. She's always working. So, but I did get to talk with her assistant, and it was good. So it was a good day. I appreciate MSBA for setting that up for us so we can be connected and know what's going on. The more details about what MSBA is supporting and what they're not supporting as far as like the legislation that's being talked about in Jefferson City, and if you guys want that information, of course I can provide that.
And then you got information about the fall conference as well.
I did. Excuse me, so forgive me for not having the exact dates, but this fall when we have the annual conference, MSBA has the annual conference, it will be held in Kansas City. Aha. So, everybody was pretty excited about that when they said it. They were like, oh. So yes, it will not be at the Lake of the Ozarks. It will be in Kansas City. And also there is an opportunity for presentations. And I've already kind of pitched an idea to Katie about a presentation. I think we were going to discuss that more at a later time with the whole board. But just about like the equity work that our board has been doing and presenting that at the annual conference.
The date for that conference is September 24th through the 27th.
Thank you.
Yeah, and they're pairing it this year with a one-day like pre-conference on like school safety.
Yes.
I believe. So.
And it's like, it's college too. So like it's our primary, secondary, and college on that school safety.
Yeah. Great.
One quick thing around MSBA, just we had talked about, I guess, for those of us that are terms are up, we got, I think, some notifications about some like additional board training that is now being sort of asked of us or required by us, and I think we talked about possibly including that as a group and just all doing it in one fell swoop so that we all have it under our belts. So just something to think about for future work sessions. I think we have plenty of time to accomplish that.
Yeah.
Maybe. But,
yes. Although another option is that there's like just a link that everybody would be required to like view a video for an hour.
Yeah.
So
even better.
Yeah.
Whatever.
We'll
just to kind of keep that on people's
Yeah.
radar that we have some
sexual
additional
harassment training
to complete.
I can hook you up because that's what I deploy.
Great. Yeah.
Great.
That's right.
Great. Well, thank you. And then I'm taking over our SSD work, and there's really nothing to report there other than congratulations to Brandy for being recognized. And I was just pulling it up that the banquet where you'll be recognized is March 5th, and I'm not sure if any other folks want to register. But if we do want to attend to support Brandy, probably just let Kat know in the next day or two, or probably. So exciting news. All right. Let's move into our action items then. Let's go rapid fire. Course revision, introduction to sustainability.
I move to approve course revision proposal for introduction to sustainability as presented.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? New course proposal topics and sustainability.
Move to approve the new course proposal topics and sustainability as presented.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Course proposal, Blue Devil Civics.
Move to approve the new course proposal, Blue Devil Civics as presented.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? New course proposal, EQ.
I move to approve the new course proposal EQ as presented.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Board policy BCC and JHCD.
I move to approve policies BCC and JHCD as modified.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Board policy KK.
I move to adopt board policy KK as modified.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Board policy ACJ, educational equity.
I move to approve policy ACJ as presented.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Board policy ACAE.
Move to adopt board policy ACAE as modified.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Can you take this
Motion
in
passes.
Yes.
Executive session. Yeah.
Hold on. I'm sorry, y'all. Y'all know I'm a crier. Okay. I move to enter executive session in accordance with section 610.021, subsections 2, 3, 9, and 13, and section 610.022 of the revised statutes of Missouri on February 20th, 2020 for the following specific reasons: personal matters and real estate matters.
Second.
All those in favor?
We do.
Aye.
We can,
Let's do roll.
okay, we can do a roll call. Go ahead, Kat.
It's been a while, but we should really practice.
Aye.
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 Aye. All right, we're in executive session.
You're a trooper. Thanks for
Thank
sticking
you.
around.